It was early spring. The wind bent the trees. Everything was flooded with water. It was getting dark and raining nonstop. There was an overturned carriage on the ground. Broken glass, the door open. Someone managed to get out, and there was blood. The girl with violet eyes lay on the ground. The rain dripped on her. Her hair was spread out and covered in dirt. The villainous Gabriella, with drops of blood, stared blankly. An abrasion and scratches on her face caused her death. She died on a rainy day in early spring. A young man approached her, called her. She looked at him squinting but never said a word. She just looked with her violet eyes. She asked a question that remained unanswered. The rain soaked him and water ran down his face, down his sharp chin, and dripped. He asked her to live. He wants this, even if they are not together. Then the boy pretended he knew nothing. He lifted her by the neck, sat down, and the young man carefully held her in his hands. Her tears were hidden by the rain, as if she hadn't cried. It was all the rain's fault. I wish the sun would shine today, he continued, but the girl's lifeless hand had already fallen. He gritted his teeth, asked unanswered questions, looked at the lady with a frown. If it were sunny, then her face wouldn't look so sad, he thought, looking at her with his violet eyes. And lifeless, Ernst Jays, the one who controls the forces of night, the leader who guides his loyal army. And this black-haired man was the husband of the saintly villainous Gabriella. Hand in hand, they walked to the altar to get engaged. It all started with the story march in the name of a true saint, when the phone fell on an open book. The girl found herself in the body of the villainous Gabriella. She barely realized this. Desperate attempts to recall the plot began. She looked in the mirror and didn't see her face. An illegitimate daughter is born to the count who lives like an angel, but in the real story, she only accuses and torments and meets her death. The heroine screamed. She clenched her fists on the mirror. She rested her forehead against the cold glass. She desperately wanted to live. The scream got stuck in her throat. She closed her eyes. She screamed mentally and struggled like a trapped bird. She didn't want to die. While the girl stood by the mirror, reading before her rebirth, suddenly, an announcement from the novel's author appeared in her head. Her hand stopped on the mirror. If we talk about a cold man from the north, then the girl knew who we were talking about. Apparently, he was the main character of the next story, she assumed. Everything can change. The story isn't over yet, because being a protagonist isn't so bad, but can she be happy in the body of a villain? The girl wondered. I thought so before, but now something has changed. When the boy held her body in his hands, something changed. A man approached and reported that the runaway coachman had been caught. A pale-faced man looked at him. The young man led the man with his hands tied. He admitted that he had deliberately damaged the carriage wheel. The coachman lowered his gaze and did not look at his master. On his back, he had the banner of the power of day. The girl lay in the young man's arms, her eyes open, blood pooling at the corner of her lips. Ernst gritted his teeth. He thought the first prince was behind this, but he wasn't sure. Just a guess. He took the girl in his arms. He turned to leave, without looking back. He said, as he walked, what needed to be done with this person. First, cut off his hands. He turned around. If that doesn't help, then they should cut off his legs so that for the rest of his days he can only crawl. The boy said coldly, showing no emotion. Gabriella's lifeless eyes watched him. She saw him like this for the first time. It seemed terrifying to her. The Duke had always been kind to her, even though the marriage was a pretense. She remembered. It was impossible for these two to fall in love for real. They only had to play at love for 3 years. The girl was very worried because her feelings were sincere. She was afraid to reveal them. Ernst held the girl tightly, tenderly calling her his wife. The day was sad for them, shedding tears. Gabriella couldn't imagine she would die, but she saved the family heirloom, which the boy gave her as a wedding gift. When the carriage stopped and the coachman offered his hands to the girl, she was very frightened. And she had no choice but to hide the ring, a valuable family treasure that fears no fire. Gabriella could not allow it to fall into the hands of the royal family. The lady grabbed Ernst's hand, tried to tell him about the heirloom, but he stopped her. No need to say anything now, no need to waste energy, the man kindly convinced. She raised her head, looked, and started to talk about the ring, but she didn't have enough strength, so she fell silent. The young man looked at her with pain in his eyes. Her whole body burned. He needed to take care of the girl's health. He exhaled. She barely whispered, gripping the fabric of her husband's nightgown with her hand. She didn't want to leave such terrible memories. She thanked them for coming and not letting her die alone. The husband watched his wife dying in his arms without blinking. The bitterness of loss was reflected in his eyes. No words were needed to express the loss. Without losing hope, he carried the girl's body. Her last thoughts were that she hoped to meet him in the afterlife. A loud male voice was heard. He addressed the lady, clarifying if she was listening or not. She abruptly opened her green eyes, not understanding what was happening and how she had ended up here. She straightened up and sat on a marble chair, her hands clasped, nervously fidgeting with the fabric of her skirt. She saw people, but didn't understand why she was there, because death had brought her to its realm. She looked closer and saw that the ruler of the Great Hall was here. The forces of day and the forces of night gathered in one place. This surprised the lady. Friendship had finally been achieved, she thought. Today, the marriage between the Duke and the princess is officially concluded. In 3 days, they will go north. The girl turned her head. There was a question in her eyes. The man was talking about her husband, Ernst. The lady understood, surprised that a marriage was being celebrated between him and the princess. An unbearable pain shot through her heart. She brought her hands to her head. As if screaming so loudly, she was about to tear herself apart in her chest. All family members pointed at her and yelled at her. They whispered that she was a disgrace to her family, a stain on the rays of the noble sun, and they called her a delirious princess. The pink-haired girl about whom there were many rumors was Princess Fiona Isodium. Ashamed, she brought her hand to her chest. She couldn't believe she had become this princess. How was this possible in her head? The man clasped his hands in a prayer gesture. If there are no revivals, then it is necessary to make signs. The man continued, unaware of our heroine's torment. Lord Ernst also needs to sign the contract. The man sat with a dark face in front of the princess and was not in a good mood. The character stared at the young man without taking his eyes off him. It seemed he became even colder and more gloomy than he was. Looking down, the young man read the marriage contract. He clenched his fist, picked up the pen, and signed without looking at the girl. The princess was in no hurry to sign. She clenched her fists, she thought. The priest hurried her, motioning with his hand that she needed to sign. A sheet appeared before her eyes, on which was a marriage vow. Dated today, taking the pen in her hand, she was about to sign. Finally, the pen trembled in her hand. The character signed, looked at the date, and calculated that 6 years had passed since the death of the villainous Gabriella. And exactly 6 years later, she became his wife again. The man closed his eyes. He was not happy with his marriage. Fiona stared with her mouth slightly open. She knew, only now the Duke hates her, because this time she is the real daughter. The girl sat at the table, thinking of revealing herself, telling the young man that she was his Gabriella. Her cheeks flushed. Before her death, the heroine prayed to meet him. And here she is, sitting in front of the boy and looking with green eyes. She is still the same, just in a different body. Having made a decision, the princess opened her mouth to shout the truth to the man. Not a single word came out. It was strange, but she couldn't say it. So Fiona decided to write, but her hand holding the pen trembled. And splotches dripped onto the paper, and she couldn't do that either. She covered her face with her hands. Now she would have to live in this body. The problem was that the princess was her husband's enemy. The kingdom was divided into 2 powers. The power of the moment is the prosperous South, loyal to the royal family, lovers of art, culture, and horsemanship. The power of night. They also love art, culture, and horsemanship, if only for one thing. They are spread throughout the northern desert, united and acting on the orders of the Grand Duke. The 2 forces have different lifestyles, and there is no reason for them to marry, Fiona thought. The girl was already in the room. She turned to look at the dress, with which she would spend 3 days after leaving the palace. She walked closer to her beautiful wedding dress. It was actually a good deal. The king insisted that the 2 forces unite. She placed her hand on the rhinestones. The deal was good, especially for the north. She whispered the name of a person dear to her, the leader. The heroine saw the man's face for the first time after the separation, but his expression was terribly cold and showed no emotion. She lowered her head. The girl fell silent. When she observed the Duke at the signing ceremony, she saw that the boy was not happy with this marriage. She became sad. He must have forgotten his wife, Gabriella, by now. He won't remember her forever, she thought, holding her hand over her dress. She closed her eyes. She frowned. This is not the time for sadness. The heroine cheered up. The boy was cold to Fiona for another reason. The girl remembered that Ernst hates the entire royal family, so she is the reason for the hatred. She rested her forehead against the mannequin. She felt very sorry, but felt joy for their meeting. Even if the man felt no joy for this marriage, she admitted to herself that she was selfish. The experiences began to torment her. The man often forgot to eat due to work. The girl remembered. It was good that the servants were nearby. She missed Ernst terribly, and the maid distracted her from her thoughts. She burst through the door and announced her presence. Fiona turned to her. She looked at her without saying a word. The maid rushed in and turned her head, as if looking for something. She stood in front of her, put her hands on her hips, and began to order. She needs to stand up, because the girl has lost weight. They need to take new measurements and sew the dress. The maid was indignant. Her green eyes narrowed. She was angry. How dare the servant speak to her like that? Fiona thought, frowning. She knew the story. Everyone bullied the girl, even the maids. They paid no attention to her since childhood. She looked at the maid. Her green eyes sparkled. When the princess slept in her bed, the girl's consciousness slowly penetrated into her. This continued for a week, and very soon it penetrated her completely, even though her body was always in bed. No one showed any concern. It was a shame. The heroine knew who started the first rumor about Fiona, one of the brothers who claimed the throne. The girl survived because no one needed her, and her brother, in his stupidity, thought he could kill her at any moment. If she wants to survive, she put her hand to her chest, where the beads of the dress were. She needs to play dumb. A slight smile appeared on the girl's lips. She had a cunning plan, but she had to be careful. Holding the ribbon over her chest, she asked the maid what was so special about the dress that worried her more than her life. The girl smiled, and the maid, not noticing anything wrong, continued to adjust the dress. She turned to the girl. She told her that the maid would die in an hour. She got scared, stepped back, and started to stammer incomprehensibly. She touched the beads with her fingers and thought the maid was very arrogant. The pearls represent the party in honor of the bride's departure, but the maid replaced them. Fiona smiled, looking at the girl. If the truth is revealed, then death awaits her. She observed the reaction. The maid jumped up, stepped back, screamed, and reached out to say it wasn't her, that she didn't know at all if the pearls were real. The girl laughed heartily, spread her arms to the sides, and ordered her to fasten the dress to make it even more beautiful. The maid bowed, her shoulders trembling. She lowered her head, and unable to lift it. She clutched her uniform with her hands, and with a slurred tongue, asked who knew all this. Fiona rested her hand under her cheek, and began to wonder who she could tell. Whether to the maids, so they would get jealous, or to the king, who made fun of the girl. The maid's mouth twisted into a scream. She brought her hand to her chest. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't her fault. The heroine brought her hands to her face, and guessed that other maids had stolen the pearls. But the girl just screamed, bringing her hand to her lips. She thought that even if she ripped out her tongue, she couldn't even blame the other maids. After all, she was an accomplice. Fiona had already been used this way many times. They knew that even if another pearl realized it, she still wouldn't have time to do anything. She clapped and decided to ask for an opinion on her brother's appearance. The skirts of the dress rustled, holding it with her hand. The girl went out. Her brother said she was beautiful, even without pearls. The maid screamed. She stood in front of the princess. She waved her arms at her. She really wanted to stop her. She brought her hand to her chest. The maid promised to return the pearls. The frightened girl screamed, "There is still time." She crossed her arms over her chest. The heroine looked at the maid. She clarified that they had already been sold, and doubted they could return everything. She pointed her finger at the floor, and gave the order to kneel. The maid was confused. She gestured with her hand. The girl did not obey, so she decided to intimidate her and go to her brother. Tell him she would marry without pearls. They shared it with the rest of the maids, and he would also warn her about this. Our heroine achieved what she wanted. The girl fell to her knees and asked the lady for another chance. She criticized her high chin. Then the maid lowered her head, lay on the floor, and begged Fiona for mercy, and blamed it on her greed. Putting her hands under her chin, she smiled sweetly at her. There will be mercy, but now the girl has become her debtor. She will be her companion, she stated decisively. The maid had to choose between prison or loyalty. She chose the second. She extended her fist and swore loyalty. Having learned the girl's name, she reached out and ruffled her hair. Now Sonia serves Lady Fiona. Bright red flowers are collected in a bouquet of revenge. This is a gift for the princess for her body. A couple of days later, the wind unfurled the banners of the House of the Power of Night. The leaves from the trees fell to the ground. A detachment was preparing to leave to accompany Her Highness. That day, the brother bid farewell to his sister. The servants also came out. Ernst and Fiona stood by the carriage and said goodbye to the man. The blonde boy, the first Prince Tudwig, pressed his hand against his chest. His heart sank at the thought that he would have to part with his sister. But his eyes betrayed something completely different. He closed his eyes, showed a dazzling smile. Nothing to worry about, The royal guards will escort them to the port, the prince allowed. The girl's behavior changed. She staged a scene in front of her brother, where she was cheerful and pleased by such a blessing. But in reality, inside she felt disgust. She opened her eyes, smiled. The girl only saw greed on his face, although the rest of the ladies at court liked him very much. And they considered him a handsome young man. Toothwick was a greedy person who interfered with everyone, used tricks, and stole sacred relics from other families. And it was he, the first prince, who interfered in the death of Ernst's wife, the villainous Gabriella. She closed her eyes, tried to calm down. She needed to behave like Fiona, not to give in to emotions. She breathed in, breathed out, but Lady Case's consciousness was still boiling. It's a shame Toothwick couldn't accompany his dear sister, the man continued, but he extended his hand. The third brother would see her off. They were like blood after all, he summarized. He pointed his hand at the boy next to him. He turned his head away from the girl. He never loved her, the heroine thought. Johann, the third prince himself, did not look at his sister. He was forced to accompany her, as he never received a place at the royal court. He was 1 year older than Fiona. The girl wondered how long she would last in his lands. Tudwig turned to his sister and gave her parting words before the journey, asking her to send him news, and not to forget her family. Finally, the heroine waited for this. The prince revealed himself. He cupped his hands to his cheeks. He began to smile, shouting words of joy, and that she would do everything, accidentally speaking of himself in the third person. She nodded so that drops of sweat appeared. She heard from the man that he was smart, but she herself thought he was disgusting, and she did not share his views. It was this man who taught little Fiona to speak. He suggested to speak of herself in the third person. The memories of the body suddenly appeared to the girl. She shivered, got goosebumps, hugged herself. Her husband looked at her sideways and looked at her with a question. She felt uncomfortable speaking of herself in the third person in public. She would rather drown, but she had to endure. She was plotting something, crossed her arms, looked innocently at her brother and wanted to thank him. The man's eyebrows arched. He was surprised and didn't understand what the girl wanted to do. Fiona grabbed her husband by the sleeve, pressed herself against him, and laughed, grateful that she had never thought she would marry such an attractive man. And moreover, she spun around, holding her skirts with her hands. She had a very beautiful dress, specifically showing pearls. The girl smiled. The ladies whispered, hiding behind their fans. They saw that the pearls on the dress were not real. The real pearls shimmered in the light. The first prince's face darkened, because he had to spend a fortune on this dress. Rumors spread at a dizzying speed. The man felt uncomfortable. He blushed. He promised everyone to take care of his sister. He made noodles. He was heard. She looked at everyone present with her big green eyes. Not only should she be ashamed, but she did everything right. Only 2 princes came out to see her off. She was curious to know where the second prince was while they were saying goodbye. The entire court watched them, but it was for the best, his absence. Before, Fiona always trembled when the second prince was near. This body only remembers fears. She looked intently at Ernst. It seemed to her that he was looking at her, and she immediately frowned. Toothpick called the butler, scolded him about the pearls, bowed, and his frightened face turned pale. The servant whispered that he had checked everything. He thought this was the work of the maids, as a substitution had already occurred in the palace. Fiona, meanwhile, continued with her game. She approached the maid, hugged her by the shoulders, asked permission to take her with her. No one else liked her. The girl smiled. She generously gave a wedding gift to her sister, who screamed with joy. She approached her sister, smiling, and warned her that if her husband bothered her, she should send a message. No one noticed anything. Goodbye, brother and sister. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Her hand trembled. A bright light burst from beneath it, burning the girl's skin. She screamed. It hurt. Gritting her teeth, she trembled, but she tried to endure it. It was necessary. She needed to smile and not show her weakness. It was just a game, and the scene wasn't over yet. She pushed the prince away from her. Ernst pushed the girl behind him and apologized to Her Highness. He would now take care of his wife himself. He said loudly enough for the entire court to hear. He turned to look at the people. They were getting into the carriage. It was time for them to hit the road. Fiona watched without taking her eyes off. Exclamations of admiration for the man were heard. He offered his hand to the girl. He, like no one else, acted with good manners. Everything she remembered about the boy was only good. He didn't show his concern for others, but with this, he showed that he would treat Fiona with respect. A bright blush colored the girl's cheeks. Her heart was about to leap out of her chest. She couldn't cope with her emotions. It became difficult to breathe after her death. She couldn't even imagine seeing him again. She frowned. These few days seemed like a mirage. The heroine never expected to be Ernst's wife again. Seeing that she was crying and turning away, the man touched her, trying to find out what was wrong. For the first time, anxiety appeared on his face. Getting into the carriage, the guy leaned against the window. He gave the servant the order that it was time to hit the road, took a comfortable position, and waited for departure. He had more than one carriage, but he decided to go with her to protect the weak princess. And now he looked out the window at her reflection, remained silent, and made sure the girl had not fallen into her elder brother's trap. The carriage started moving. The coachman controlled the reins. The heroine was glad to be able to leave here. The first prince watched them leave, but Fiona escaped his clutches and from the entire kingdom. The princess looked at these people who were familiar to Fiona, but not to the character. She was returning to the lands she loved. Seeing her reflection in the glass, the girl shivered each time she was surprised, as if it were the first time. She touched a strand of hair. She couldn't get used to her new face. She looked inside herself. She examined her face. She touched her lips with her hand, and the heroine saw cat-like eyes, rounded eyebrows, soft porcelain skin, and rosy cheeks. She was 23 years old. She touched her cheek. She liked the girl. She was beautiful, like the early days of autumn. Without anyone noticing, she was lost in her appearance. She nodded. She needed to get used to the fact that this was now her face. She lowered her head and thought. The problem was this body. She has to act innocently. Gabriella was a villain. She acted like one. The girl became curious. Several questions arose about who killed Gabriella on that dark day. The character was sure that Ernst had already figured it out, and lost in her thoughts. She assumed it was the first prince. He is trying to win the battle for the throne. He is very interested in treasures and artifacts. His target was the stones. He could easily have planned her murder. Another question tormented the girl about what she would do in the future, when she might end up in the past. Not yet in her body. She could have gotten there with her knowledge. She yearned for a connection with her husband. She could have done it. She remembered the moment she swallowed the ring, the same one her husband gave her. She thought, bringing her hand to her mouth, she would have to figure everything out as soon as she returned to the palace. It would also be interesting to know where Fiona herself, the owner of this body, was. The lady thought, shifting her gaze around the carriage. But this is not the most important task. She just needs to give the ring to Ernst. They will live happily ever after this time. She tried to convince herself first. She looked at the silent man. He stubbornly pretended to be busy with the scenery outside the window, and the girl really wanted to sit next to him and talk, but she couldn't just tell Ernst that she was Gabriella. It was bitter. She brought her hand to her throat so that not a single word would come out. She took her hand away, clenched it, looked at the man. The blush wouldn't disappear from how close she was, but at the same time, so far away, Fiona sighed deeply. Ernst didn't even look in her direction, and it hurt her. She turned away from him. She looked up. Leaves were falling from there, and she watched them with fascination. She closed her eyes. The cool wind pleasantly caressed the girl's skin, as if she had returned to that day again. Gentle waves cut the seacoast. Each step leaves footprints in the wet sand. They were together. That day she confessed her feelings to him. The boy sank into her shoulder and did not respond to her confession. He just looked at her. She became sad. She fell silent. There was only peace and tranquility between them. In Gabriella's eyes expressed love. She missed those days. She wanted to get rid of the magical shackles and tell her husband everything. But as soon as she brought up the topic, she couldn't utter a word. She hooked on the word shackles, said it several times, tested it. She had heard it somewhere before, but she couldn't remember it. She screamed, bowed her head. A conjecture shot through her whole body. This couldn't be happening, but she understood what had happened. The girl remembered that she had already read about this. In that same book, the main protagonist, Ingrid, was also struck by a spell. The redhead's surprise knew no bounds. The hooded figure confirmed her assumptions by pointing to the book. Her role was sent by God. Every hero has their own purpose, the reserved person confessed. If she fulfills it within a certain time, the shackles will be removed. The girl frowned. She needed to be told everything in more detail. She was ready to listen. The young man turned around and handed the book to the girl. His words were not that difficult. He could even show it if necessary. She touched the book, looked at it, held it in her hands, and was in no hurry to open it. The boy watched the lady attentively, with his red eyes shining from under the hood. It was a book of characters. The girl unfolded it. She began to leaf through it and tap it with her finger, reading what was important to her. Her finger stopped on the right line. She saw an exception. This is what she was looking for. The young man in the robe pointed to the character. Ingrid Weibel. A long-term spiritual spell was cast upon her. The girl stared at the entry. To remove this spell, you must play your role. The lady opened her eyes, and her face darkened. She slammed the book shut, lowered her hand, and stared intently at the boy, awaiting some kind of explanation. The red eyes glowed. The man under the hood warned her. If she failed, the spell would not be lifted, as if thunder had rumbled. She brought her hand to her forehead. She laughed. Her cheeks took on a reddish hue, and she looked back at the man, smiling openly. She saw him pull the hood over his face, and asked when this mad god would remove her shackles. No one knows the answer to the question, but it should happen soon. He turned towards her, revealing his face. A slight blush appeared on the boy's cheeks, and he invited her to join him. Her hands held the phone. All the characters' phrases were there. After reading and exclaiming, just like that, our heroine read everything in the book. She clenched her fists, gathered the fabric of her dress to remove her shackles, and told her husband that she was Gabriella, that she needed to play this character for a while. The heroine was a villainess who pretended to be cute, which is why she ended up in Fiona's body, and raised her hands. Strange as it may seem, the princess was suitable for revealing Gabriella's character. She had been thin for a long time, pretended to be weak, cried a lot, and pretended to be an angel. She feigned innocence, clenching her fists tightly. She put her hands together. She pursed her lips decisively. She accepted herself as such and will act. She has to do it and is willing. The girl's gaze turned wild. She decided she would smile sweetly and say what was expected of her. She would tolerate any surprise. She would easily play her innocence. She would perfectly play her character and free herself from the chains. She closed her eyes and covered herself with her hair. In fact, the girl really missed her husband and friends. She raised her head, the wind shook her hair, and it flowed over her shoulders. In reality, she loves Ernst. This is the kind of plot this story needs. The man watched the lady's silent torment, saw how she clenched her fists, and looked out the window. My eyes widened when I heard Ernst talk about going on a trip for a couple of days. Upon arrival, the lady will be assigned the right wing, and the young man will continue to live there with his maids. Fiona was upset. Under her eyes, she realized that the man was very cold towards her. This saddened her. Nothing worked on the first try, and there was no need to be kind, thought the heroine. The boy closed his eyes. The girl was evaluating him. It had always been like this, but now his gaze and voice had become deeper and more serious during this time. Ernst noticed the princess's inquisitive gaze. He narrowed his eyes. Something was wrong with his face, as she was staring at him so intently. The girl laughed wildly, raised her hand, closed her eyes, and nodded. She said everything was fine, and a cute blush appeared on her cheeks. I thought about what to tell the man. I decided. I put my hand under my chin, laughing. I asked him a question, because my husband is very cold now. Suddenly, she felt uncomfortable in the carriage. Ernst emitted dark waves. Fiona was embarrassed and would bury herself. This time, the boy did not remain silent. He lowered his head and exhaled that he had done it on purpose. The heroine remembered how she twirled in the courtyard in front of everyone with her skirt, showing off her pearls to her brother and his entourage. She opened her eyes, pretended to be cute, put her finger to her mouth, but couldn't admit she did it on purpose. Ernst replied, looking at the girl, that she shouldn't have done this. He married Fiona, considering her not a very intelligent lady. The heroine understood that if someone were smarter, more cunning, or posed a threat to the north, the man would not have married, so she would continue to play dumb. The girl admitted that the dress was uncomfortable. The man was surprised, and at first couldn't even say anything. To be honest, Ernst didn't think about it. It turns out her dress was too tight, he clarified. They could have stopped and called the maids to help the girl remove the dress, but she exclaimed, refusing the servant's help. This is not what Fiona wanted. She stood up and leaned on her hands, enclosing the man in the ring of her arms. He also came closer. Her breath fanned the boy. She was stunned by such behavior. She said seductively, maybe her own husband would help her untie the corset. Getting closer to him, she wouldn't stand idly by. She pursed her lips. His face darkened. For a minute, he wanted to do this. He would recognize her if the girl resembled Gabriella. She turned to return to her place, without turning her head, and agreed to call the maids. She sat down, hiding her hands behind her. She lowered her gaze to the side. It's normal for Ernst not to recognize her. She was blinded by rumors and gossip, but he doesn't know. The girl remembered the East Wing. A building for annoying guests, a beautiful place, but located too far from the main building. They will not live as a couple. With her hands tightly gripping the bow of her dress, they had celebrated their engagement earlier in the north. The man explained. She couldn't just enter this annex, so she would leave quietly. But then they would recognize her. Her hands tightened harder on the bow. Anger filled the character. She would do anything to make the man recognize her. The detachment set up their camp. Large tents were in a clearing, and the main tent was surrounded by guards. Ernst was sitting at the table reading a letter, leaning on his hand, when a shout distracted him from this matter. Lifting his head, but without removing his hand, everything went well, the man clarified, looking at the newcomer. The deputy commander-in-chief, Sebastian de Seine, smiled happily, clenched his fist and raised it. He confirmed. Ernst got up from the table, the assistant continued. The rest of the squad delivered the cargo and placed it on the ship. The man closed his eyes, relaxed, praised him for his excellent work, and was satisfied with it. The transport was partly necessary to solve a military problem, but mainly for civilians, those who witnessed the overthrow of the first prince. This was the original plan from the time of the marriage. Only the closest, the elite and Sebastian, were aware of this mission. He raised his cup, took a sip, closed his eyes, and finally found a way to get rid of the prince. He coughed, spat out the tea, and turned to Sebastian, telling him he had never learned to cook. Covering his mouth with his hand, the boy laughed, brought the teapot, narrowed his eyes with pleasure, and replied that it was still better than the lady. Suddenly he became serious, and reminded him that the anniversary of her death was approaching, and that he would love for the commander to leave a gift at the tomb. The chief's lowered head spoke of reflection. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and stopped Sebastian's attempts. He slumped into his chair and hissed, warning the laughing boy to watch his words. He told the assistant in the back that the princess had helped them a lot, and they needed to express their gratitude to her, as he was sure everything was in order. The boy rested his elbows on the table, supporting his hand. He found it hard to accept this, although he understood everything perfectly. Sebastian turned abruptly. He narrowed his eyes. The commander himself knows how much his wife was respected. The lenses of his glasses shone. Ernst lowered his head. He blushed at such words. He nodded. He knew everything perfectly. And the assistant continued to talk about the princess. She will not harm the north. This topic has been carefully studied. The young man clenched his fists. He wasn't going to look for a wife after Gabriella's death, although he felt sorry for Fiona, whom the first prince made fun of, not having studied the rules of behavior in society. She was like a child. The prince approved of the girl because she wasn't intelligent. He needed her for revenge, but now he will protect her like a younger sister until the end of his days. But the commander could not believe that she, as rumors said, was prone to sleepwalking and to madness. They were ripped from the conversation by a man who reported an important fact. A battle began, and he shouted. Ernst jumped up, but Sebastian calmed him down. He let him sort out the papers here and rest, but he needed to leave. As he left, he recalled their first wedding night. The prince froze. Even 10 years later, he felt uncomfortable that someone had become his wife again. He was very tired. His strength was failing him. He ran his hand over his face. A drop of sweat rolled down his cheek, and he closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be a difficult day. The man understood. He wanted to close his eyes and rest. A fire burned quietly in the street. Silence. Night had taken over this place. Ernst sat on the edge of the sofa, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Melancholy seized his heart, remembering his Gabriella. She would be disappointed in him if she found out he married for revenge. He used the princess. He was bitter about it. Just to get closer to the first prince, he had the opportunity to move freely throughout the territories of the Day forces. He touched his hair. He looked up with his blue eyes. He had other excuses. He couldn't find words to express his emotions. 6 years is a long time, but every time the young man closes his eyes, he thinks of his wife. He remembers her smile, her pale skin from the cold, soft, warm body. I will never see her again. He closed his eyes, squeezed them shut. The loss is too great. Ernst blamed himself. Guilt lay like a heavy stone for not being able to save, not being able to protect his wife. The pain was terrible. He ran as soon as he read her letter, but he couldn't do anything. Every detail of her death was remembered. Thoughts of it plunged the man into despair. Now every rainy day, he visits the place of death. I remembered what kind of rain it was that day, the deserted land, and the bright scarlet blood was imprinted in my memory forever. Her cold body, her last breath. Ernst promised that all those guilty or involved in her death would be punished. They would lose their heads, and he clenched his fist. Fiona entered silently, holding the curtain, saw a man lost in thought. She cleared her throat and apologized for her intrusion. She shouted his name loudly, brought her hand to her chest, looked with her huge eyes, and she didn't know what the boy was thinking. A couple of minutes ago, a fire crackled in the street. Tents were set up, sparks flew up into the sides, providing warmth. Fiona looked down with a sad gaze. There was no romance on their wedding night. She realized that the man did this on purpose, because otherwise he would have had to stay in the same room as her. She, of course, was very flattered that Ernst rejected all women. She didn't know what to do in this situation. The girl was completely angry, crying or laughing. I looked from the carriage, saw a maid sitting by the fire chewing a pie. And I called her. She stood up abruptly, straightened up, clenched her fists, ready to listen. Saphira didn't know where the Duke was, but she promised to find out, turned around, and quickly ran off somewhere. The skirts of her dress fluttered from walking fast. Fiona liked her agility. She sank into the seat. It's not that she didn't want unwavering loyalty, but she saw that the maid wanted to be on good terms with her, knowing that the princess had saved her life. And now the girl stood there, smiling happily. She managed to reach the man and offered to make him some delicious tea. The young man was not pleased with Fiona's intrusion. His face darkened, the lady saw it but was not afraid. She would not leave here so easily. She told the girl not to bother. She got angry, stopped laughing, and looked at him with a different gaze. I saw teacups behind the man and realized that things were really bad. Since Sebastian had prepared the tea, Fiona argued, because she knew for sure that the boy loved tea, so she wanted to prepare it. She bombarded him with questions so that she could prepare tea and drink it, but the man remained unwavering. He found excuses. Then the girl decided to press for pity, and almost with tears in her eyes, she began to talk about how everyone hated her outside. And the gaze attack worked. The boy allowed her to have tea, but then immediately went to bed so that the lady could leave, moving away from her as she joyfully extended her arms. The aromatic tea was ready. The heroine poured it into cups, carefully holding the teapot lid as steam rose. Ernst was on the other side of the table, but even from there, he noticed that the girl knew about tea. He realized this when there was a story with pearls. Fiona did not see the boy's tormenting thoughts. She enjoyed the tea ceremony. And the prince's thoughts concerned the house's attitude towards the princess if she prepared tea herself. She wasn't so much curious as interested in how an unintelligent girl could make tea so skillfully. Besides, she drew a parallel. A warm, familiar feeling arose in her chest as she saw how elegantly she handled the tea utensils. He stared without looking away. There were no signs of any emotion on her face, but the boy was confused. He was about to touch the saucer cup with aromatic tea when it was taken away, and moved it in her direction. A young man. He picked it up, wanting to take a sip of tea, because the girl tried so hard that she lowered her eyes, and looked at what he held in his hands. Fiona was delighted. She clenched her fists and shook them. Lights danced in her eyes, just as the tea was about to cool a little. As soon as Ernst took a sip, he was overcome by familiar sensations. Unable to believe that the tea's taste was familiar, he couldn't take his eyes off the cup. He missed this taste greatly. The tea his wife, Gabriella, made. The girl leaned forward. She was curious about the young man's reaction and waited for a response, but she couldn't remain silent, and said that tea with honey tasted much better. A smile barely touched the lady's lips. She asked questions and waited for answers, while pushing the boy towards the truth, giving him a fleeting reminder of villainy. She put the cup down on the saucer. It was empty. Now it was time for her to leave. She said quietly, said goodbye, and wished good night. The cups were on the table. Ernst was left alone. Only a trace of perfume followed the princess. She left quickly, just as she had appeared, leaving questions behind. Gabriella also loved tea with honey. He remembered it. There were many questions, but no answers. Strange feelings. The commander feared the girl might use some sort of tactic. He leaned back on the sofa. The princess reminded him of his wife, but the man convinced himself that she had thought of everything. He was sure of one thing, he knew it for sure. He put his hand to his head, thinking what he should do with the princess. He would not put her in the east wing, but would watch her closely. But he couldn't get rid of the strange feeling. He remembered his Gabriella. She was a respected duchess. She didn't laugh often, but when she turned and smiled, a man couldn't remain indifferent. In the end, Ernst had to break the terms of the contract, which stated they shouldn't fall in love. But the girl didn't leave his heart in peace. It was a passionate love, the man acknowledged. He was distracted by everything related to it. And when, after so many nights of dreaming of the villainess, it seemed like he needed no one but her. But then she was snatched away. Aaron winced, leaned forward, lamented. He wanted to be happy with Gabriella. But it didn't work out. And now, he is tormented by thoughts of Princess Fiona. The next day, the girl didn't suspect she was tormented by the man's thoughts. She stretched and took a deep breath of fresh air. She exhaled and saw the soldiers sitting by the fire. Every day, she had the feeling there was no home. It was depressing. Fiona saw the gazes directed at her, and there was contempt in them. They didn't accept her, but the smile didn't leave her face. This is a role. Something caught the princess's eye. She clenched her fists and stopped. Some of the soldiers were covering their mouths. The young men covered their mouths with their hands, coughing. The cough was dry, and everyone in the detachment fell ill. The girl stared at them, opened her mouth, and realized everyone was sick. And she didn't know how to react. She said it out loud so everyone could hear her. The maid began to step aside, but she wasn't embarrassed, and the lady pointed out her business to them. All the young men, upon hearing the princess's voice, turned to look at her and watched expectantly, holding cups with something hot in their hands, from which steam was rising. Giving them a smile, she offered them tea with honey, because when she's sick, she always drinks it. She saw that the cough was severe and decided to help. She ordered them to drink it. The young men were confused. They looked at each other but remained silent. They didn't know how to react to the princess's action. Saphira was indignant. They couldn't accept ordinary tea because it was too difficult to prepare, and she was angry. Precious honey was used, extracted, stuffed into honeycombs, and cinnamon was added. And even lemon. The maid gritted her teeth, reprimanded the soldiers, got angry, and shouted because her anger was justified. The ingredients were not that easy to get. The girls had done the hard work. The princess sacrificed her expensive jewelry to get all this. She sent a maid. No one knew, so she was angry. And remembering how she stirred this broth until it turned blue, she became even more enraged and poured it all over the boys. After Saphira's speech, the young men exhaled. One of them decided to try and brought a cup to his mouth, but he was stopped, his hand being held. They didn't believe he decided to take a drink. They calmed him down. The princess couldn't harm them. Still, having decided, he took a sip, opened his mouth in surprise. It was very tasty, and he felt embarrassed. In front of a large steaming cauldron, the boys lined up for the broth. The maid skillfully handled a ladle and gave orders. Fiona watched from the side. Saphira got emotional. She raised the ladle and shouted that gifts should be thanked. One shouldn't remain silent. The princess was filled with gratitude, smiling brightly. Her maid would like such words. Later that night, the warriors were sitting around the fire. The heroine watched them. There was coughing, but it was milder and not as strong. She thought if she had behaved like this when she was Gabriella, perhaps something could have changed. But then she was indifferent to everything. After the marriage, she thought about how to survive. She became happy when she gave her heart. Due to indecision, the girl managed to approach Ernst only after many attempts. She feared that he would not reciprocate her feelings. It was the same with the boys. She was afraid to approach them. She thought they wouldn't accept her. A temporary duchess. But now she regretted it. Fiona laughed. Her cheeks turned pink. Tomorrow she will bring more. Not much. There is little honey left. Among the young men, I saw Christian. He was sitting and collecting the remnants of a cup with a spoon. I saw him for the first time when I was 17. All the soldiers were dear, but 5 stood out especially. Sebastian, Ernst's friend and loyal aide, Christina, distinguished by her devotion. The bravest of all was Briegel. The girl missed them no less. 2 more Balkan and guys were dear and beloved. Giving a smile to everyone around her, the princess carefully sat down next to Christian and greeted him. She gestured to him with her hand. He closed his eyes. She couldn't believe that the young man had matured and grown so much. He was now older than her. He stood up and didn't speak to the girl. He just told her to stop looking at them and go back to the carriage. Satisfied with herself, the heroine understood that rejoining them would be very difficult. Not that easy. Then Fiona called him by his last name. The young man turned sharply towards her, discouraged. He didn't tell her. The girl slowly approached him. If they had time to get to know each other, was his answer. But personal hostility should not be shown openly. She walked past, touched the tips of the man's hair, and left this unofficial matter. She turned around and smiled. Christian's reaction provoked the heroine, bringing her hand to her mouth and smiling. It was still fun to tease him. If he hasn't changed, he'll think about her words, because he doesn't take such things lightly. She examines him to see if the lady is a threat. The girl wanted to be closely watched. That's what she achieved. The desire was for Christian to watch her. She hoped the boy would discover the truth and recognize Gabriella in her. If her plan didn't work, it would be sad. Even if they don't fall in love with Ernst again, that won't change the fact that she is still the Duchess of the North. There, everyone has their own ocean. The task is to illuminate it. Looking back, the girl understood the path she had already traveled. That was enough. The next day, someone persistently woke the princess. It forced her to get up, but the sleep was sweet. She put her hand under her cheek and slept soundly. Now the day forces and night forces have united, so uprisings cannot be avoided. As much as you want, as expected, the heroine believed. She got up, looked out the window, and clarified what had happened. A smile lit up everything around her, despite the gloomy morning. A man in a white frock coat appeared before her eyes. He introduced himself, put his hand to his chest. He was in charge of transporting provisions. He was worried that the northern troops would come and demand to share. Jekken was indignant and furious about this. He considered the northern fleet stupid and narcissistic, and raised his arms in anger. Fiona put her hands to her mouth, her smile and the light emanating from her not leaving. She understood that they thought the girl was on the side of the day forces, already all red from his shouting. The man did not calm down. He needed to save the provisions and not give them away so easily. He tried to reach her with his indignation. The heroine expected this, so she was not impressed. She narrowed her eyes, gritted her teeth. All his anger was directed at the princess. She wanted the northern soldiers to ask for food. Unable to stand it, he began to call the girl outside for a conversation. Looking at him from the carriage was not enough. She stepped forward, put her finger to her cheek, asked a question, pretending not to understand what was happening or what to do. He saw the lady, stopped dead, considered her a complete fool, and what was she talking about? He opened his mouth and took a step back. The emperor entrusted this young man with an important matter, his chance to succeed, and strengthen his position at court. But when he looked at the heroine, his stomach began to churn. He approached the girl, loomed over her, and looked down from above. He thought Fiona was too young for such questions. She was not afraid of the man looming over her. She looked with her green eyes. He continued to talk about her youth. The heroine interrupted him, opened her mouth, and a smile appeared at the corners of her lips. She laughed, narrowed her eyes, played her role perfectly. But there was no point in offending her husband's army. She clasped her hands together. It was not worth mentioning the emperor often. She suggested that Jaya Khan imagined himself a monarch. She moved away from him, brought her hand to her eyes, and by just looking at him, she turned her back. She called him a careless man. The man was dumbfounded. His face darkened. He was furious with anger. But he couldn't do anything. He sent him to the palace. Having lost his reason from anger, Gekken shouted at the girl that she had no right to judge him. Fiona staggered, bringing her hand to her forehead. She didn't want to see her companions. She gave the order for everyone to leave immediately. Otherwise, they would lose consciousness. The soldiers were bewildered upon hearing this. They opened their mouths. It seemed their jaws dropped to the floor. They didn't understand what their fault was. He held his hand to his head, eyes closed, not feeling well, which he warned people about. Christian observed this performance. The girl smiled, walked away, turned around, and said that you shouldn't be such a sissy just because you dislike someone. The young man behind Gekken surprised her by saying he was now responsible for moving the provisions. The guy was confused, pointed to himself, asked again, and the emperor's nephew looked at him very cruelly. After thinking, the young man was glad, clenched his fists. He wants this position and is better in many ways. Gekken shrieked, waved his fist. No one dared to stand in his way near the emperor. He was proud of it. The men clashed, shouting and indignant. One spoke of the emperor, the other of the princess, yelling at each other. A fight broke out. Gekken couldn't stand it. He shouted an insult, raised his fist, and grabbed the guy by the neck. Meanwhile, the princess was satisfied with herself. Everything was going according to plan. A few days ago, she handed out tea and observed people's relationships. She closed her eyes, happy with the work done. She identified her opponents, and now she got an excellent result. Sebastian stealthily approached the girl inaudibly, whispering in her ear, making her eyes widen and shiver. Meeting his gaze, the boy gave her a beautiful smile and wished her good morning. He put his hand to his chest, introduced himself, an officer of the Northern Fleet. The young man suggested he could help the lady sort out this mess. Embarrassed, the girl smiled. She allowed him to do as he wished. It was a pleasure to meet you. Sebastian left, but he reminded her that the girl shouldn't see this confrontation. She clasped her hands. This fleeting concern felt pleasant to her. Ernst's appearance forced the soldiers to stand at attention and salute. Fiona mumbled something nearby. Having become a good girl, she informed the man that the soldiers protected her, and that everything was fine. She nodded. The Duke repeated the boy's words that she did not belong here, that she should not witness such situations, and that he would take her home. He turned to leave, but the girl stopped him by the fabric with her hand. She didn't understand what was happening. He turned to look at her. Fiona shouted that she would not move from her spot until this man left. She flushed so much that her cheeks turned red. To get closer to Ernst, she needs to show which side she is on. That's why she needs to get rid of the day forces. Gekken shouted about the misunderstanding. The commander changed his face and walked towards the boy. The girl followed him with an alarmed gaze. He leaned on his sword. His gaze was severe. A frown. He turned to Gekken so he would listen carefully. He was no longer in charge of provisions. The former pharmacist lay on the ground. His hand was pierced by a sword. The soldiers behind heard the order and saluted. He turned to the lady and asked her not to do anything. It was a good way to keep the enemy in its place. Saphira ran, pushing the soldiers aside, shouting and reaching out in an attempt to stop the inevitable. The maid attacked Gekken, sat on him and began to strangle him. He cursed and behaved aggressively. He couldn't forgive the bastard for what he did to his princess. Fiona felt uncomfortable and put her hand to her mouth when she heard Saphira demand the hairpin be handed over, and that not a single person in the world would exchange an emerald hairpin for a jar of honey. And at the same moment, conversations from the soldiers were heard, whispering. They were impressed by the girl's action, and the maid confirmed, pointing a finger at the man, that he did not just give away the honey, and then brought an hairpin. The soldiers started shouting. They had no idea they were drinking such expensive tea. They thought, scratched their cheek with a finger, directed their anger towards Gekken. It's not about deceiving the good princess. Ernst looked at this. Blue splashed in his eyes. Bursts of lightning surged from within, but outside it was calm. Only his eyes betrayed him. The next day, it was announced that the man who disrespected the princess was sentenced to death. Ernst heard that the cold-ridden soldiers were given honey tea and expressed his gratitude to the girl for this. He warned her that next time, if the princess needed anything, she should contact him. The Duke looked at her without blinking. She looked away and fidgeted nervously with her hands. She simply didn't want to bother the man and finally gave him away. She turned to leave. Ernst didn't turn around, and the girl shouted mentally. Her heart beat at a frantic pace, begging to remember, to guess that she was Gabriella. Her throat felt tight. She couldn't utter a word. I put my hand to my chest. My gaze followed him, and I begged him to remember. The ship was at the dock. From there, a gangway was placed so people could board and bring necessary items. Sebastian adjusted his glasses. The commander dismissed half the soldiers. The guy asked again, clarifying, and these are only those whom the emperor personally dismissed. The young man was glad that the circumstances were on his side. Ernst was surprised that the soldiers treated the princess favorably. They looked at the water and shared their thoughts with his assistant. The young man nodded in agreement. Bosses often take advantage of their position to control the weaker ones, but on the other hand, it's refreshing like honey tea. The boy laughed. The commander turned abruptly, looked at Sebastian, and saw positive changes in him. They saw the maid and the carriage where the princess was. The assistant explained to them that the soldiers came because they were worried about the girl. Unlike the first prince, she was kind to them. Saphira didn't let anyone near the carriage, shouting that it was none of their business, and firmly defended the princess. Indeed, Sebastian continued. Today they would meet the investigative team sent by the royal family, and Fiona was supposed to join them. Initially, the royal family and the Duke were in a difficult situation, trying to maintain balance, but the Nightlands lack provisions. They have magical oil, a lot of valuable oils. With this marriage, the North is in an advantageous position. Thanks to the princess, the situation has radically changed. Food supplies, glowing grass, experts, and research, all this seems impossible to Ernst. An agreement was drafted. It contained several articles that spoke of offspring and rewards. Pastimes, they could accept these conditions. Anyway, it won't be enough for them, the man thought. He will never accept anyone by his side, except his wife Gabriella. So Ernst stands in front of the princess's carriage, knocks on the door, and the wait lasts for many minutes. The last thought he had was that there was no one else but the villainess, before Fiona jumped out of the carriage. And show a smile. Their gazes met, time slowed down, paying no attention to anything. A lightning bolt slipped between them. The girl fell into the man's arms, buried herself in his shoulder, and was enveloped in a scent so familiar. So familiar. They walked down the street. Fiona lowered an umbrella to shield herself from the bright sun. Ernst in front. People passed by. The heroine held the umbrella with both hands. She looked down and thought about what had happened. The man asked to go for a walk, and now she wondered. His voice sounded, warning that a little later he would introduce her to the investigative team. She turned around and was disheartened by the fact that he would name the head of this detachment. He would lead. She opened her mouth at this. She didn't know what to say. I looked at her and continued to talk about how they had been trying to find a cure for morning sickness for a long time. But nothing had worked, so they were very happy to gather experts from different fields. He stood before her and abruptly bowed to the girl, thereby expressing his gratitude for her help. Without much of a head, he said that if she didn't like something, he would fix it. He asked for only one thing. Don't expel anyone. Fiona did not expect this. She leaned towards him, stopping him but without daring to touch him, and recited an agreement. If only the man would stand up. The lady had no intention of expelling her. There are many important people in the duchy, but she herself thought that this guy had not changed. He remained the same, sacrificing himself for the common good. The character lit up the street with a smile, closed her eyes, and offered to make people happy together. Ernst stood up and clenched his fists as the girl now bowed before him. He was confused and didn't understand what he was doing. While in the bowed position, he realized something was happening. A strange sensation arose in his chest. He felt pain. The princess fell to the floor, extended her arms, and covered her face with her hair. The girl was flying somewhere down. It was warm and painful. Her hair was scattered and falling. Upon opening her eyes, she saw Ernst's smiling face. The shirt she had on her chest opened, and a blush appeared on her cheeks. The heroine smiled. They were supposed to board the ship. Apparently, they were late, she wondered. She jumped up, sat on the boy, he rose on his elbows, crossed his arms over his chest, and playfully threatened him. She made fun of him. The Duchess was testing his patience. The man exhaled, succumbing to her. It was too hot. The lady gasped as he ran his hand around her waist. Bringing her closer to him, it was too intimate. It was too hot in the room. He called her Gabai. Seeing her pink hair, she slumped down. She got confused. She sat on the bed, stretching her arms, a little surprised that he called her by name. I jumped on the canopied bed and saw Saphira, who had knelt down and was picking up dishes. It was like a dream. Fiona covered her eyes with her hand, trying to understand how long they had been sailing. The maid spoke of her experiences when the Duke personally carried her to the cabin in his arms. But it turned out they didn't sail, as the wind had strengthened. They had to wait until tomorrow. Saphira went to inform the captain about her awakening, and the lady looked around the cabin. No wonder they settled the sick princess here. The captain's best room. I saw the clock. There was still time. She could get up and meet the squadron. They knocked on the door and opened it abruptly. They apologized. It was Ernst. A short old man entered with the man. He brought a doctor to examine the girl and let him proceed. He smiled. He narrowed his eyes. The old man introduced himself and asked for permission to examine the girl, if she didn't mind. Lorenzo approached the bed, took her pulse. The man was nearby and watched as his best doctor in the duchy examined her. He remembered his dream. He wondered what it was. The vision was so bright, and the nickname rang out. This is what her husband called her. This was Fiona's world. It was lonely, and no one could understand her in this heartbreaking pain. The doctor said he noticed nothing strange about the girl. Apparently, she was tired from the long journey, which surprised Ernst. The lady was sad. Her eyes were filled with bitterness. Everything was fine for her, but it wasn't normal. No normal person would lose consciousness after a trip north. She grabbed Ernst by the sleeve and stopped him. He needed to meet with the investigative team. He turned his head away from her. He tried not to look. She needed to rest, and he threw her out without turning around. She shouted loudly, blushed, attracting attention, and wrinkled her nose. Closing the door behind her, the girl was left alone in the room, standing on the floor. Distracted and lost, the princess didn't know if it was a mirage or a dream. She truly hoped that was her future. She longed for it, because Ernst smiled and acknowledged it. The firewood crackled in the fireplace. The room was warm. Fiona remained on the floor for a while. They had a long way to go to reach each other, and she exhaled. And discreetly, looking out at the sea, a man stood thinking, resting his hands on the railing. With tense shoulders, it seemed like the boy was going crazy. Fear was so familiar to him, imprinted on his heart when he saw the girl fall. I remembered old Lorenzo because of his illness, but she was still worried. The princess reminded me so much of Gabriella that I realized they were two different people. Fiona quietly approached the boy. She called him, he flinched and looked at her, narrowing his eyes. He looked at her with an attentive gaze, not staying still. He thought about this girl, but remained silent and did not say it out loud. He looked up from the railing. He turned to her. He reminded her of the rest. Fiona shook her head. She would be calmer by his side. She handed him a sandwich, smiling, and offered to eat together. The girl doesn't accept no for an answer. The man took the food. He distractedly muttered that he asked the cook to bring him dinner, but he didn't finish his speech. Everything became clear without words. Fiona nodded, saying the sandwich was very tasty. As soon as I tasted a piece, I realized that they tasted very similar to the ones Gabriella made. But I remembered that the girl said she had asked the cook to cook, and I chased away the vague doubt. He turned abruptly, put his hand to his mouth. Fiona saw this, became alarmed, raised her hand to touch but didn't dare. He turned completely, grabbed the railing. The girl next to him closed her eyes and began to sing a song. The man was stunned. He knew this song, the song of the nymph Nereid, and was surprised that the princess sang the sailor's song. This melody flowed from the heroine, confused without ceasing. It sounded, quietly spreading into the silence. The Duke couldn't resist and couldn't stop her. Peace and tranquility invaded Ernst without taking his eyes off her. He listened to the song. The soldiers called her and came on deck and wanted more songs. The girl invited them to sing together, and the soldiers, echoing her, embracing each other, sang songs, calming the situation. They were ashamed, but did not stop singing. Even if she was pretending, everything would be noticeable from her exhaustion. But Fiona was sincere, and whoever doubts it can be ashamed. She raised her hand and waved to the boy. There was a radiant smile on her face, and Ernst imagined Gabby when he looked at the princess. The man always wanted to know. He looked at her. He had to find out right now. The man did not forget Gabriella. She was everywhere in memories, in dreams, in reality. He did not forget her even after her death. Court Dr. Lorenzo could not look at the young man in such a state and prescribed him medication. After this, Ernst began to pretend that everything was fine, but the pain of losing his wife was strong. And he couldn't forget her. He admitted to himself that he couldn't take his eyes off the princess, because she resembled Gabby so much that he tried not to notice. But now he had to find out. Fiona smiled, narrowing her eyes. A blush appeared on her cheeks. Be sure to let the man know why they were so similar. The next morning, breakfast was fun. The girl at the head of the table covered her mouth with her hand. The rest sat and listened to her, sometimes smiling. The princess was glad that they were the emperor's ambassadors and not strangers. Everything was fine. She calmed down. I snapped out of my thoughts. I heard that someone couldn't be here due to the weather conditions. My eyes widened. Urian was a wizard. The man beside her shared his doubts about whether his skills were needed here. The princess laughed. She put her hands under her chin. The boy didn't believe in magic, she thought. A girl in glasses approached her. She told her that, upon reaching the port, they would go to the laboratory. They would inform her of the results and the budget for 3 months. Trisha was she, with a brown ponytail, wearing thick-rimmed glasses, the head of this research group. She understood that the princess wouldn't fully grasp the report, but she wanted to share it. She raised her hands, shouted that she would try to help them, and confused those present with so much zeal. Silence fell. Only the boy nearby turned to the princess, telling her they would be there soon. When the girl's trail disappeared, she was already undercover and contemplating her homeland. The sea breeze played with her pink hair, her gaze not leaving her. Ernst called her, but Fiona, overjoyed and grinning from ear to ear, looked towards her home. She turned to the Duke. The happy smile did not leave her face. They finally returned home. These words made the man freeze, staring at the girl without blinking, disbelieving what he was hearing. The road from the port to the house was not too short. Ernst looked at the girl. She tilted her head tiredly. She leaned on his shoulder and took a deep breath. An old man greeted them. He introduced himself and bowed. The princess recognized the butler. She straightened up. She put her hand to her chest, smiling. She was happy. She wanted to introduce herself, but didn't have time. As she remembered she had to act silly, Ernst stepped forward and looked at Fiona. I couldn't find anything to say to the man, so I ran to hug him. I introduced myself. And I laughed. Owen didn't show that this was strange. He responded to the lady very friendly and asked the maid to take her to her chambers. The girl was greeted by a sweet old woman. She would prepare her a bath because she was tired from the journey, smiled, and asked to call Grandma Betty. Fiona felt flattered by such warmth and ran into the old woman's arms. Grandma would take care of her. Ernst turned around and was about to leave. He needed rest, but he nodded slightly towards the butler. Fiona smiled sweetly. The joy of being home prompted Betty to leave. The heroine submerged herself in a large bathtub. She closed her eyes. The water caressed her delicate skin. Her voice clarified the water temperature. The girl turned around. She asked Sapphira to call her madam and explained that she was a princess by birth, but that she was now a duchess. Betty gave Fiona a strange look. The girl realized that those words were unexpected from a princess who had lived her whole life in a palace. Later that night, the heroine went out in a light nightgown onto the balcony where the sea was. She enjoyed the smell of the sea, although she didn't have the duchess's chambers, but she was glad she wasn't pushed to the east wing. Fiona wondered. Her cheeks turned red as the boy allowed her to stay here. It means he was slowly opening up to her. She was happy. I remembered that when Betty was washing the girl's hair, they started talking about the Duke. People considered him kind. They hoped he would like her. The man scratched his head and looked away. It would be better if they were alone, but for now they need to sleep together for at least 2 weeks. The girl looked at him with admiration. He had 2 questions for her. Now they will talk about everything. He didn't look at Fiona. He averted his gaze. He began to talk about the first question. The families of the day live in different rooms. To preserve the spouse's personal space, if you want to have a lover, it will be easier. After all, she, the princess of the day forces, must be used to this. He looked at the girl with a deep gaze from his blue eyes. The night forces live together. For now, they must stick to this and try not to bring anyone else, the man said. Fiona was embarrassed. She doesn't need this. Her reaction was strange, but the heroine hugged herself by the shoulders and smiled happily. She wanted to share the same room with her husband. The second question also concerned the guests of the mansion. There was a girl, Charlotte, who would turn 11 this year. This was a loyal family. This family had a daughter. 3 years ago, there was a war, and the count died in this war. The man lowered his head. He died saving her life, protecting the Duke, not sparing himself. But he asked to take care of his daughter. Since then, Charlotte has been his weakness. He brought his hand to his eyes. The girl had morning sickness. That's why he allowed her to stay here, because he has a great responsibility for her. The young man thought it was selfish of him, but he wanted to keep Charlotte and make her his little sister. Fiona exclaimed she was happy to have a sister. She took his hand and pressed it against hers. But there was one condition that the girl made. The boy could expect anything, but not the following words. She asked to do this with him. Adopt together. She offered to enter into a marriage contract. The man was bewildered. He did not expect such words. The girl had behaved unpredictably before. I remembered Gabriella. She also offered to reach an agreement. To do it together. He drew the parallel more and more. She touched his hand with her palm, looked up. There will only be 4 conditions. She said the first condition. The girl smiled, closed her eyes, showed her finger. This agreement will be valid for 5 years. They must pretend to love each other. She also raised the second condition and showed 3 fingers. There will be respect for their partners. Problems will be resolved through conversations. If after 5 years someone wants a divorce, the contract will be extended. When Gabai died, she only regretted one thing. That time had been wasted. They had so little of the 2 of them. She didn't want it to happen again. She didn't want to waste time. While Fiona was lost in thought, the Duke exhaled sharply. He didn't want to hide the truth from her, so he replied in a low voice, but so she could hear. Standing opposite each other, he wanted to be honest with her. So he considered the first condition impossible to fulfill. He couldn't love the princess. He will try to avoid rumors that her life is unhappy. There will be respect towards her. She smiled sweetly. That will be enough. He nodded. They crossed pinkies, even if he forgot about Gabai. Even if there was no love between them. She needed the boy and didn't want enmity between them. She wanted to return his smile. The man frowned. It was too late, and it was time to go to bed. The next morning, as she stretched sweetly in bed, the girl opened her eyes and let in those who were calling her from outside the door. 2 girls appeared before her, Sapphira, and introduced her to the new one. They would help her get ready. She jumped out of bed. Fiona stared at the smiling Hazel. She was the maid's granddaughter. Sitting in front of the mirror and looking at herself in it, she didn't react to the girl's surprise. She simply asked her to take care of her. She smiled and asked about Ernst. When she woke up, he was no longer there. She was curious about where he was. Hazel smiled, held a hairbrush in her hands, and replied that the Duke had already left for the port. The maids took her by both hands. The dress was emerald, but her face was sad. She thought that the man, as always, was striving for everyone, but she couldn't stand still. Going out into the hall, she looked towards the stairs. All the palace servants greeted her and bowed in her honor. The old butler and Grandma Betty were also there. They also bowed and wished her good morning. She placed her hand on her chest. She asked how her morning had been. How had she rested? She closed her eyes and showed sincere concern. The lady was happy. There was a time when she heard a greeting every morning. My heart beat faster. She also saw a girl hiding behind the butler's leg, too shy to show herself to the princess. The girl emerged from her hiding place, clutched something to her chest, and timidly introduced herself, and looked at the lady with her own eyes. Bottomless eyes, empty pupils. Charlotte had too many symptoms of morning sickness. She leaned down to the girl, her smile was wide. The girl was genuinely happy to meet her. Fiona treated the baby very kindly, and even suggested calling her sister. She handed over what she was clutching tightly to her chest. Charlotte wanted to gift her this scarf. She knitted it herself. She decided to give it as a gift because it was cold outside. The girl was delighted. She immediately put on the scarf. It was very cute. A gentle warmth enveloped her neck, and she thanked her. But suddenly, a scream was heard, and everyone present turned towards the door to see who was shouting so loudly. A woman took a girl in her arms and asked if she was hurt and if she was all right. Owen scolded the young woman to introduce herself first, placing her hands behind her back. She straightened up and made the excuse that she was worried about Charlotte. It was Rachel, the girl's teacher, who felt unwell. She handed Saphira a handkerchief, and she herself noticed every detail. The fact that they didn't call her madam, and that there was no address for the girl. This is their first meeting. But the princess said something else, that if you run like this in the corridors, you can get hurt. She laughed. She brought her hand to her mouth. It is possible that Rachel will no longer greet in the morning. Otherwise, Charlotte will learn bad manners. The young lady clasped her hands to her chest. She looked scared. She didn't understand. The princess was angry with her. The heroine thought she was playing the victim. She laughed. It was the first time she saw a noble run so frivolously through the palace corridors. Having approached the girl, she grabbed her by the shoulders when she felt unwell and didn't even have the strength to move. She turned, rubbing her hands. Rachel's face darkened. The greeting did not take place due to the conflict, but now they will make it official. She continued by saying that she was glad everyone arrived on time. Starting today, everyone will greet at the same time. She wouldn't fire anyone like this. Everyone was watching. She wanted to make friends with everyone who worked in the palace. There will be no servants from the day forces here, but she will not offend her maid Saphira either. The boys looked at each other and smiled. He leaned down to the girl, announced that she would now be a little princess, and smiled at her. Here I ended my speech. Now we must perceive Charlotte as the Duke's little sister. All the servants bowed to her and greeted her with shouts, but the girl was in shock. And as soon as Rachel stood there and blinked her big eyes, Fiona turned to her. She looked down at the teacher. A smile appeared on her lips, but not a sincere and kind one. She ordered her to bow. Finally, the princess achieved what she wanted. Rachel lowered her head and bowed her darkened face. Satisfied with herself, Fiona looked away. Now the order had been given to address Charlotte only as Miss. Her face darkened, her eyes betrayed anger, and the question of what was happening echoed in her head. She ran down the hallway, her skirt billowing, her fists clenched in indignation. She considered herself the only noble person in the mansion. She thought that one day she would be with the Duke, which is why she became a teacher. Rachel stopped abruptly and saw people led by Ernst, who were walking forward. She jumped towards the man, clasped her hands together, looked at him with doe-like eyes, and cried out. She extended her hand towards his. She needed to tell him something, but before she could touch him, a voice was heard nearby. Sebastian jumped in front of the Duke, covered himself with a folder, and smiled. The lenses of his glasses gleamed. He said congratulations. The smile didn't leave his lips, but his thoughts were dark. He thought that the assistant was an idiot, always at the wrong time. He was surprised that this had already been announced. He brought the folder to his lips, but it had not yet been officially announced. She covered her mouth with her hand, saying that the princess was impatient. She greeted everyone, and she couldn't resist telling it. She believed that was an opportunity to humiliate her. These are the day forces that sounded from her lips. Sebastian looked at her mischievously. He saw through the girl, but he listened. The day forces cannot stand those who are susceptible to morning sickness. He continued to loudly develop his thoughts about whether Charlotte would suffer because of the princess. But he didn't quite finish. As the Duke interrupted her, without listening to her, she continued to present her arguments that she was a teacher. When she was stopped, she was confused. Now Charlotte should be called Madam, the Duke said, repeating Fiona's words exactly. He reminded her that their marriage was a personal matter, not public, and therefore, it does not concern a mere teacher, and he threw it over his shoulder as he left. And they left, leaving the girl looking at their backs, with anger bubbling inside her. Something the princess was using. Her lips trembled, Rachel's face was grim, dark thoughts swirled. She needed to find the truth by all means and reveal it. She bit her finger, thought about it, and heard that there was another royal family member in the West Wing. I looked out the window at the roof of the extension. His name was Johann, and I thought of something bad. And at that moment, the princess asked the butler how much a change of mood costs. And she asked him a question that concerned her. She wiped her face with a napkin, wiped away beads of sweat, laughed. It must have been expensive. But she truly dreamed. She opened her eyes and looked at the girl after saying it would be great to introduce tourism here. I remember that conversation already happened, when Gabriella was inspired by the same idea. She laughed, blushed. It was a polar night in the duchy. She had never seen it. It gave her away in the end. She thought about it, because then she didn't have help from the day forces, but now she can use it. She turned to Owen. Her skirt swished behind her. A smile lit up her face. An idea appeared. The butler was disheartened by the princess's behavior. She reminded him so much of Gabriella, as if they had known each other for a long time. I entered the hall late at night. I didn't realize time had passed. As she walked through the whole palace, the girl was sad. They were already waiting for her at the table. Charlotte jumped up and shouted greetings. The Duke was also standing near the chair. He looked at her with respect and asked her how her first day in the duchy went. She laughed, put her hands to her mouth. She was happy. She walked through familiar places, so time passed quickly. A man stopped near the head chair and said confidently that this was now his place. The servants noticed the attitude the Duke had towards his wife. They would not give rise to rumors. Everything was as he promised. She felt flattered by this attitude. She nodded, and her heart beat faster. She closed her eyes. Her face turned crimson. She felt good. Thanks to the man, she put aside all her worries. I looked at Charlotte. I asked her who she wanted to become, and when she found out about the artist, she was very surprised. I succumbed to it. I became interested. I even forgot about the food and expressed the desire to see her somehow. The Duke also looked up from his food and echoed Fiona, hoping he would see this too. Then, the princess reminded him of the brooch that is attached to her chest and opens all the courtyard doors. And the boy agreed with her. He stood up. Such a thing must be given to her. They looked at each other. Charlotte screamed. The poor child didn't want to distract him from his work. They were so busy that there was no point in bothering him. She turned to the young man, how the third prince was, and the inspection. A conversation ensued between them, discussing the uninvited guest. This person's presence here had been planned for too long, about a month, and they were not happy about it. She wiped her lips with a napkin. Ernst closed his eyes. The girl knew that she would go back to work now. Then she took a glass of wine and offered him a drink. A smile lit up her face. We must toast to the Count and the Countess. The young man noticed Fiona picking at her food with a fork, removing cucumbers, and noticed that she didn't like cucumbers. The girl didn't lift her head. She was busy eating. She replied without thinking that she didn't like them. It turned out the Duke didn't either. He mumbled that the previous Duchess didn't like them either. The lady laughed and feigned surprise at such a coincidence. She offered to choose a brooch. You can choose any. She received a report that the girl had taken some things. She placed her hand on the table and turned to her. But the lady did not need jewelry. It's not worth spending money on them. She lowered her head prettily. It's better to invest in the mansion. But the man insisted on his own. There is no need to save. There is enough money for the contribution. Fiona was surprised by this. But as long as she is in the body of a girl, she needs to take advantage of this. Suddenly, he handed her a paper, asked for help, and doubted that Charlotte's second name was appropriate. She laughed. She thought the girl had written it herself. She suggested Ekka's, smiled, closed her eyes, and was satisfied with her actions. She brought a glass of wine to her lips. She liked it. It wasn't that bad, so be it. She set it and took a sip. Bringing her hand to her chin, the girl smiled and asked the man if there was any place she was not allowed. Curiosity took over her. What kind of place was it? A little later, the two were already walking down the corridor. Ernst in front. In this mansion, you can walk anywhere, everywhere, but you should not enter the underground prison. And he stopped before the huge door. It is not desirable to enter the former Duchess's bedroom. He turned to her. This place was not for everyone. He expected her understanding. So you shouldn't come here, the man said in a low voice. The girl laughed and asked to go there just once. She wanted to know how the previous Duchess lived. The man opened the door. Nothing had changed. The bed was neatly made. Everything was still the same. She walked to the reclining chair. A blush colored her cheeks. Everything was dear to her heart. She smiled a dreamy smile, remembering the warm moments. Ernst did not remain silent. He said that the room had not been cleaned for a long time, that dust might have settled. But that was an obvious lie. Here, at first glance, it seemed that the room was not tidy, but that was not the case. It was perfectly clean. The man knew he should have addressed this even before marrying Fiona. But he couldn't and clenched his fist. The heroine couldn't believe he hadn't done anything. She exhaled barely audibly and whispered her question to Ernst. The Duke's words made her lift her head and stare at him. A blush burned her cheeks, and she repeated the words about love after him. The character believed he had already forgotten her, that he would not look back, and everything had passed. But what she heard now made her heart beat faster. She recalled the moment when only paper knew about her feelings. She sat and shed tears over a letter she would never have sent. Without realizing it, she touched the bookshelf, from which a book fell and opened to reveal some letters. I picked up the letters and was surprised where they came from. The heroine remained silent and looked at her husband. Inside Fiona, Gabriella thought about how she didn't sleep for long nights, how much she loved the man. She cried and poured out her soul onto paper. Her hands clutched the paper tighter. Her gaze turned grim. The letter contained the feelings of a woman. Loneliness a true friend. The princess saw her sad and pain-filled gaze. She took his hands in hers and called him softly, sharing the pain between two. He ran his hand, pulling them away from her hands. She was confused, brought them to her chest, and in her eyes was a question she couldn't ask. Clutching the letter in her hand, she apologized to the girl and asked her to go to her chambers. He closed the door behind her, waved his palm, and hiding a happy smile, he said goodbye. Ernst rubbed his eyes with his hand. He sat near the door with that same book. He exhaled heavily. He couldn't imagine this was possible. He looked down sadly. Apparently his words then hurt the girl more, and she reread all the letters. Her wish was to die that day with Gabby. But the coincidences the man noticed caused him crazy thoughts of rebirth. I didn't understand my actions. Why did I want to be kind to the princess? I asked myself a question, but she knew one thing, that the only woman she loved was Gabriella, and she would never replace her. He walked down the corridor. In the great hall, Charlotte and Fiona were sitting at the table, busy reading. The silence was palpable. For a long time, the heroine searched for information about the Duke's house relic, and finally found a clue. Everyone's favorite snake, the moon goddess, and nowhere and everywhere. She was everywhere, which recalls the description of the ring. She crouched down, read what was said about the sea snake, and without looking up, she grabbed it with both hands. I bit my finger, thought about it, reread it again. I didn't understand. I assumed it was prose about greatness. She wondered where the ring was. Ernst definitely didn't have it. She was afraid it remained in Gabriella's body, because by swallowing it, she thought she would save it. She clutched her head, but for now, she couldn't talk about it so easily with the day force. So she was boiling with inaction. She can only hope that the man himself will talk about it, but that is not the only thing she will have to wait for. But we still have to wait until a cure for morning sickness is invented. Charlotte sat and stared into space. The medicine will have to be made by Saint Ingrid, a red-haired girl, a medicine that will cure all diseases. The main component is unicorn tears, a divine concentrate that can cure any illness. Just one drop, and you can resurrect the dead. You can obtain unicorn tears at the border of the day force's territory. And the knights, only those with a pure heart can find a unicorn in the bright forest. If you get the tears, you can cure Charlotte's vision. The girl was distracted from her thoughts by Sebastian, who smiled and adjusted his glasses. He closed his eyes and announced that Galahad would arrive. The girl jumped out of her chair, shouted with joy, "Hilda and Balkan will come," she asked. The man opened the map and decided to explain to the girl that Galahad's main mission is to protect against pirates. He pointed to the enemy they protect ships from and receive corresponding payment for it. The Navy specializes in pirates. Thus a military triangle is formed, he explained. Fiona crossed her arms, smiled. She realized that thanks to the fleet, help was being provided. She shouldn't forget about the Polar Knights. The man praised her and called her intelligent. We need to organize a small event in honor of the fleet's return. The boy suggested to the girl that she do it. Fiona exclaimed cheerfully, jumped up and raised her hand. It is a great privilege to organize a holiday for the fleet. She got up from the table. The heroine also offered to go shopping for the girl, but she was confused. It certainly sounds fun, but she was afraid of something. She lowered her head. Charlotte felt sad. She didn't want to be a burden on this trip. It was better for her to stay at the mansion. Then the character addressed Sebastian. This clarified to him that the girl had never been taken anywhere nor called. The man thought, scratching his head. It seemed to him that the lady had never gone for a walk before. He squatted in front of Charlotte. He took her hands in his. He wanted her to accompany him. She was not a burden and would not interfere. From such words, a tear welled up in the girl's eyes. The heroine persuaded them to enjoy the warmth of the sun today, and she wanted to come for dessert. Teacher Rachel was talking about a delicious peach cake. The little one was delighted. She will go for a walk for the first time and looks forward to tomorrow morning. A faint blush covered Fiona's cheeks. She closed her eyes. She also looked forward to the next day and was happy. But the next morning, everything did not go as the heroine had planned. There were 4 in the carriage. The atmosphere was tense. No one understood how it happened. Unable to bear it, the third prince shouted, offended that the girl called him sugarhead. Fiona covered Charlotte's ears so she wouldn't hear the man's shouting, while scolding him to keep his expressions to himself. But the boy didn't listen to his sister and continued to be indignant, ordering her to speak normally. Her cheeks flushed with indignation. The girl interrupted him and started to say her piece. The prince couldn't help himself. Fiona remembered that Johann was always the victim, the little boy alone, the moonlight filtering into the room. The first prince is the son of the empress, the second is the son of the queen, but the girl and the third prince were children of unknown empresses abroad. The little one stopped smiling, which he inherited from the second prince, and at some point stopped paying attention to his sister. Johann's behavior cannot be abandoned. To disrespect her means to disrespect the North Sea. They quickly arrived at the square. Getting out of the carriage, the sun shone on their faces, so they had to cover themselves. Fiona smiled, shielding herself from the sun with her palm, cheerful and happy, and clarified where they should start. The girl didn't notice someone calling her. She tugged up her sleeve and looked away from the square. It was a short-haired girl. She held an envelope in her hands. A handsome, tall young man asked her to deliver it. Fiona stared at the letter. Johann sunk his head into it from behind her shoulder. It said that he had booked time at the Blue Crystal Boutique. It was worth choosing the best dress. The girl's face darkened. It cost a lot of money. She was worried that the expenses would be enormous. The assistant cleared his throat. His Highness had prepared something. Would you like to see it? The heroine was glad her husband took care of her and looked at the designs with a sweet smile. And now they were already in this boutique. Upon opening the door, they stood frozen with their mouths agape. Everything shone and sparkled. In the large and spacious hall, there were mannequins with elegant dresses. They were greeted by a friendly woman, the owner of the boutique, Madame Nutri, who immediately began to speak flatteringly about the princess. She took Fiona's hand, asked her to attend to her, and to create the best dresses for her, and the loud voice of Miss Charlotte was heard. The owner chirped like a nightingale. She told the number of dresses, 10, 20, but the Duchess's hand stopped her. She put her on her shoulder. Her face was grim. Not noticing anything around her, the woman turned, confident that she had counted a little. But a loud no did not float in the air. Fiona's words made me scream. She was scared because she asked for her money back and didn't accept anything. Having resumed her role, the girl feigned stupidity, saying it would be strange if she were the only one to shine in expensive dresses, and the officers in old things. This boutique has no competition, so I sadly thought about not making a refund. Therefore, I found another excuse, saying that I didn't want to look better than the officials. Then Madame laughed. Her younger brother sews men's clothes. Maybe I'll ask him to come up with something. The heroine took advantage of the situation and accepted it as a gift. The owner was surprised, but quickly resolved it and made a gift. The girls held hands. Now you can safely buy yourself a dress. The third prince was watching them. Something alarmed him. The young man smiled. She will never change, he thought, staring at the girl. The prince sat surrounded by girls. His whole life was an endless party, love, passion. The prince did not renounce his right to the throne, but without doing anything. In all this he, Johann, drank wine from a glass. The girls fawned over him, but he seemed inaccessible, thoughtful, bringing them closer and pushing them away. Good alcohol that appears at the flick of a finger, delicious desserts. It's nice not to think when you're drunk. and simply inhale a pleasant feminine aroma. But the reason he still remains in this duchy is because of the smiling girl Fiona. I remembered how I ran into her room, came to say goodbye to him. I didn't understand what was happening, but the girl's joy was great. Bottle in her hands, dark circles under her eyes, she didn't hear what her sister was saying, believing she had gone mad. But the girl assured that she would marry a good man and there would be someone else in her body. She pressed her forehead against his. She asked him to help her sister. The more he pushed Fiona away, the more attached he became. He jumped off the sofa, shouted, and when asked to extend his hand first and not leave without help, he got irritated. The young man thought about all this, hunched on the boutique sofa. Now he gives his consent to his sister. He looked at the girls. He didn't know what kind of help Fiona was asking for, but he would definitely help her if necessary. All the escorts had disappeared somewhere. The heroine wondered. They were crossing the square, she and Charlotte. She bought skewers for the girl and a gift for Ernst. She carried a heavy package in her hand. They had to return. Suddenly, a girl screamed. Something was under her foot. She pointed downwards, frightened and alarmed. Fiona's face darkened. Charlotte realized she had stepped on something important. They looked closely at their feet. It was an invisibility cloak, and underneath lay a young man with ashen hair on the ground. Rubbing his eyes, he thanked the ladies. If it weren't for them, he would have starved to death, and Urian introduced himself. Fiona's eyes widened. She recognized the name. A guess flashed in her eyes. He was an investigator she hadn't been able to meet. The man turned out to be a vegetarian. He hadn't eaten for 3 days. He thought about sneaking into the restaurant, but his strength gave out and he fell there. Putting her hand to her chest, the girl will provide him with a personal chef who will prepare the dishes. She immediately thought of Ernst. Jurian laughed. His horoscope promised him a meeting with the owner of the snakes today, and he thanked His Highness. The boy looked with a slight smile, as if looking into his soul. Fiona suddenly thought. She calculated his birth date and realized he was born in the year of the snake. The heroine laughed, hugging Charlotte. The boy is wrong. She has another zodiac sign. I was distracted by the appearance of the assistant. He announced that the carriage had arrived. Fiona looked at her again. She easily pushed Jurian towards the sergeant in the back. He would buy her food and take her home. Getting into the carriage, the princess looked at the man. If he was right, they would meet at the hospital. The men stood watching. Urian smiled. Meeting such a man was incredible, he thought. The sergeant bothered him, knowing where they were going. He crossed his arms over his chest. The girl hadn't woken up yet. She didn't know how to use magic. He became interested. The moon illuminated the Duke's mansion. Not all windows were dark, nor was the entire courtyard plunged into sleep. Ernst was sitting in one of the offices, surrounded by letters. He kept reading them, holding a sheet of paper in his hand and disbelieving the words. He imagined Gabriella writing a letter, biting the tip of her pen. It was her habit to catch an elusive thought and not miss it. The man would never forget his wife until the end of his days. He made such a strong promise. I must write about this short-lived love. My heart aches from longing for this name. I will never get an answer, but at least I can leave a letter and flowers at the grave. During the meal, the Duke asked about the outing. After exchanging jokes, the girl asked about Rachel. She froze with a piece of meat. Suddenly, the teacher disappeared. The man composed himself and spoke decisively. He needed to say something about her. He wanted to convey Charlotte's education. Miss Rachel was chosen only because she speaks the ancient language. You can choose someone else if the princess is against it. She smiled, stuck out her finger. She is still misinformed, so I will just look at her. He nervously fiddled with his fingers and decided to talk about the dress. It was too expensive. He could use that money to repair something in the mansion. Without looking up at the girl, he mumbled that he didn't want to change anything here. It reminded me of Galahad's arrival. You can only decorate something for the holiday, but you shouldn't touch anything else. Fiona exhaled sharply. She disagreed with the man. His face darkened. He exhaled barely audibly. As soon as she comes to life, there will be changes. The heroine jumped from behind the table, put her hands on the table, raised her voice. Unable to hold back, because the mansion was already old, and at this rate it would fall apart. He smiled at the corners of his lips, but his eyes remained sad and said that this was also not bad. Later, Ernst stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his back tense, asking his people what the lady had done. The escort himself straightened up and shouted that the girl had taken almost nothing. Sebastian exhaled loudly, drawing attention to himself, and mumbled that the lady was not as stupid as they said. The man suggested that perhaps she indicated some other boutique, but the sergeant denied it. He knows that Blue Crystal has no rivals. I crouched down to finish writing something, and the assistant reminded me that in such situations, one talks about going to another boutique. And haggle. The sergeant looked at him strangely, because there were no competitors, and then he could not reach an agreement. Fiona seemed to know something, as she didn't even stutter about her competitors. The man thought about it. He turned to Sebastian. What would he tell him? He leaned back. He crossed his arms. He already understood something. He looked at Ernst. The lady was not as stupid as they said about her. She looked up from her letter, picked up her pen and thought. Besides, she freely reads old books. The girl is very intelligent. Her behavior in the fitting room is proof of this. You wouldn't wish such an enemy on anyone. He turned abruptly to his friend. The princess hadn't done anything wrong yet. There were no bad intentions. She helped find Gabriella's letters. She looked at the Duke with a surprised gaze. He continued to speak. She didn't ask the girl for anything for this, but she didn't do it. Sebastian believed the girl should be trusted, but he wouldn't mind keeping an eye on her. She needed someone who could not only watch over him, but also protect him if something happened. Christian rubbed his hands. He was embarrassed to be here, to evaluate the princess. He carefully said she was beautiful. A girl in an emerald dress twirled in front of a man, asking him if it suited her. This was very important, because she would be at the ceremony. Fiona also asked about the anklet. She showed him her legs. The exhalation was heavy. The boy was embarrassed. Covering his face with his hand, he refused to look at her. But the girl stubbornly asked about her appearance, and skillfully made fun of him. She burst out laughing. The lieutenant was embarrassed. He said, covering his mouth with his hand. He couldn't calm down from laughter. Christian remembered Gabriella, who also whispered about embarrassment and made fun of the young man. The girl feigned surprise at Christian's behavior. She clarified what was happening to him and understood that he was hinting indirectly. She clenched her hand tightly into a fist. There was no need to calm down. She couldn't be Gabriella. She calmed herself. Soul transmigration is only in books. A week later, the princess, shaking out her skirts, ran to the carriage. Ernst calmly followed. She was excited that they would finally meet. She was happy. A smile lit up her face. She turned to the man. He was in a good mood, so she laughed and joked, and replied that she was happy to go with her husband in the carriage. She finally wanted to recognize her. He asked about her dress, and there was a dry answer from the Duke. The princess exhaled, unimpressed by such an answer. She already knew when a man spoke sincerely. Men won't be able to take their eyes off my wife, he said, looking directly into her eyes. Her face remained impassive, but Fiona knew he was lying when he looked at her with admiration. Her cheeks were flushed, and she spoke with a sigh about the girl's beauty. There was little time left. He placed his hand on the princess's shoulder and told her to get into the carriage. She lightly touched his hand with hers and whispered when she passed, because he was also a human being. A ship sailed on the perfect blue sea. The waves did not disturb it. It moved calmly towards its dock. Colonel Guise, holding his head, shouted, "We will be there soon. Everyone is waiting." The Admiral of the Navy nodded without a smile that today was his arrival at the duchy. The young man was cheerful and wished to drink the wine that had been taken from pirate ships. We didn't think there would be wine on the ship, especially since there was a wedding recently. It would be an excellent gift. Guise was a little worried about the young man. He didn't like the power of day, and if he attacked the lady, he shared the young man. With his head bowed, the Admiral was also worried by these thoughts. And he was afraid of this, hoping she was a kind person. A while ago, Fiona was looking at lists and saw that the man was taking his son and his grandson. He said it with some difficulty and a smile. But the old man was embarrassed. He said that workers would also be needed there. And he thought about what kind of woman he was working for. Gathering people around her, looking up from the sheets, the princess grants them paid leave because they worked hard. And faithfully, the people cheered, but Fiona gave them well-deserved leave. One day for a year of service, so everything turned out well. You can rest, and your job will remain yours. The servants rejoiced, their faces flushed. They couldn't wait for this. They would serve their mistress all their lives. When the Admiral and Sebastian met, they praised the lady's intelligence, that she worked with paid leave. The man turned to look at the flowers. The girl chose not roses or lilies, but daisies with elegance, because roses would not have withstood the cold. Colonel Annette was outside. She refused to eat or drink at the event of the new lady, so she was here alone. There was a greeting, and the Duke and Duchess entered the hall. The girl grabbed the man's hand, but walked confidently. Fiona heard the soldiers rejoicing at her beauty. She felt embarrassed. She was happy. She squinted to the side. She noticed that Anita was not in the hall. She became sad but did not show it. This young man was her best friend. After Gabriella's death, many things had changed, but she knew she blamed the forces of the moment for the death. She was indignant. She called her friend an idiot, which is why she wasn't at the banquet. Her husband began to look at her sideways. The admiral approached them, putting his hand to his chest, greeted the lady and told her his name. Balkan. She sincerely smiled at the man, looking at him intently. He was not hostile. They made her a priority, because the duchy was a priority. He presented her with a gift, wine that had been confiscated from pirates. The girl cried out in surprise. It seemed very strange to her that they had such good wine. Balkan invited them to drink some wine, and the servant quickly brought them a glass of red liquid. Suddenly, I felt something strange. My pupils dilated. My heart beat faster. An unbearable pain pierced her entire body. She leaned forward slightly. The others noticed that something was wrong with her. Her body burned from her fingertips. Suddenly, Ernst picked her up in his arms. The princess screamed. He was afraid the girl would have a nervous breakdown again. She started to deny, but a flash of pain forced her to bring her hands to her eyes and embrace the man's arms. She screamed from the attack. She couldn't help herself. There was a man sitting on an oak barrel. The heroine didn't understand where she was. She ran with her eyes closed. She didn't understand what was happening. A man emerged from the barrel, the same wine confiscated from pirates, and he stole Charlotte. He grabbed the girl by the hair. We have to save her. The man held the little lady by the neck with one hand and had a knife in the other when he saw Fiona. He decided to make an exchange. The dress rustled. The princess walked towards him, but there was fear that he would grab them both. He grabbed the Duchess, his green eyes opened. She screamed in pain, splashes of blood flew to the sides. The heroine didn't understand what she saw, neither the dream nor the future. She was confused and surprised by such a phenomenon. The blindfold was still over her eyes. It seemed like the girl was returning to the beginning of the dream. It doesn't matter if it's a mirage or a dream, if she could look into the future and save Charlotte. A bloodstain appeared on Fiona's neck. The only way was found. She exploded on the bed and Saphira called her, who was standing and holding a basin in her hands. The girl screamed, worried about the lady. She said there was so much commotion outside and chattered fearfully. She jumped out of bed, took her dress. The maid tried to stop her, but as usual, the princess repeated that she needed to save Charlotte. Her hand tightly gripped the fountain pen. She gave the girl the order to stay here, and she left. Running out of the room towards the stairs, I saw a battle where soldiers were fighting. The sound of swords could be heard everywhere. Looking at his sword and seeing the new Duchess in the reflection, the natural question arose of what she was doing here. The admiral turned his head in her direction. He shouted, stopping the enemy's attack. He yelled at someone that he could handle it, but that he needed to run after the lady. The princess was running and thought she needed to be followed. That's right, she needed to be saved. The Duchess arrived in time. Just as the villain grabbed her, she managed to scream and kick the air. The frightened pirate threatened to kill the girl if everyone didn't disperse, and brought a knife to her face. The girl and the soldiers were frozen, wondering how the pirate appeared on the second floor. Someone told His Excellency that Charlotte was in danger. Fiona had already tried everything, and nothing worked in the dream then. So she touched her neck and pointed to the shiny necklace. It was a precious decoration. She touched it with her fingers, the stones sparkled. She could give it as a gift. The man didn't understand what she was doing. He asked her several times what it was until he realized, and the girl put her hand to her cheek and played dumb. She laughed, saying she was a great duchess. Finally, the pirate realized that the duke's new wife was crazy. And it was true. And the princess distracted the boy as best she could, because that way Annette would have a chance. The girl was confident in her actions. She knew that only the boy had a bow and could help. In the dream, he was already here and waiting behind the tree. You have to take the pirate to the window. Then Fiona sat on the floor. She complained like a little child that her legs hurt and she couldn't walk. Let him climb alone. Cursing, calling her cheeky, he approached her. At that moment, she was keeping her view prepared. She needed a little more. Annette pulled the bowstring and was about to release the sharp arrow, with beads of sweat rolling down her face from the effort. The sound of breaking glass and a man's scream could be heard. An arrow hit him in the hand. Blood spurted out, and he let go of the girl in surprise. Fiona pulled Charlotte out and screamed for her to be taken away. It all happened very quickly. The girl fell into the men's arms, safe in fact. The Duchess had made a decision long ago. Between a future where Charlotte would suffer and where she would suffer, the choice was obvious. Behind her, a wounded pirate appeared, who offered her his hand. That's all. She calmly accepted her fate. He grabbed her by the hair, pulled her back, and warned her that if she kicked him, he would cut her throat. Although the heroine was willing to accept, she was still frightened. She closed her eyes and blushed. The request to stop came from a man walking seemingly calmly, but he clenched his fists in rage. He confidently said that the pirate chief's ship had been captured, that he would release the girl, and she would remain alive. But the pirate didn't believe him. He asked for a boat, but first ordered him to throw away the weapon. Otherwise, he would lose his head. Ernst dropped his sword to the ground and prepared to comply with the condition, and ordered that nothing be done without his order. The pirate put a knife to Fiona's throat and threatened to kill her, while sweat dripped from the girl's flushed face. Pointing the knife at the man, he demanded that the Duke approach slowly. She winked at him and gestured as best she could, feeling the blood on her neck. Ernst hesitated, and the pirate noticed it. And in the next second, the heroine raised her hand. She stabbed the pen into his neck. Blood gushed from the wound, and the man screamed. Fiona collapsed, exhausted. Christian jumped towards her, alarmed, constantly asking about her well-being. He was glad everything went according to plan. She looked back at her husband, exhaled, and saw that the man couldn't manage alone. Hit the pirate. Blood flew in different directions. There were no emotions on the man's face. He was just focused on his goal. Then Fiona shouted that she was almost unharmed, that there was no need to do this in front of the child. The example was bad. She begged him to stop. He turned to them. There was blood on his cheek. He shouted that no one understood what had happened to his wife. His blue eyes sparkled with rage. Ernst scolded her. She lowered her head. She felt uncomfortable. Tears appeared, but she stubbornly did not raise her head, trying to say something. She didn't want to lose consciousness again. She didn't hear her husband's words. Her face darkened. She apologized. She would be more careful. The man stopped short, seeing that something was happening to the Duchess, and shouted excitedly. He asked to hold her, with his eyes closed. She vaguely saw Ernst reaching out his arms and running. At the same time, in the underground prison of the mansion, Sebastian stood before a man tied to a chair. Bleeding, they admitted their mistake. No matter how much they tortured him, the man remained silent. He had abrasions and scratches on his body. The torture was sophisticated, but apparently he really didn't know who the instigator was. The young gentleman sat on a chair, crossed his legs, and read the report. He brought his hand to his face and concentrated. Surprised by his assumption, he exhaled. It was surprising that pirates did not receive official recognition. They knew the exact route from the wine cellar to the chambers, which means they know the layout of the mansion. He jumped to his feet. A rat had settled in his house, the man concluded, clenching his fists. Suspicion immediately fell on the third prince, Johann, or someone wanted them to think of him and get rid of him with their own hands. Sebastian was also bleeding. He thought about it. He brought his hand to his mouth. Suspicion falls on the first prince in this case, and he wants to get rid of his competitor. He looked at Ernst approaching the stairs. The assistant knew he was heading towards the lady. Already halfway there, the Duke stopped. Without turning around, he told his friend that the search was ongoing. He continued upstairs, focused. 10 years had passed since the last penetration, wondering how the first prince managed to obtain information. Confident that the duchy was united, but someone might have betrayed it. They made a deal, he suggested, bringing his finger to his mouth. Perhaps these thugs entered the mansion, posing as workers. The young men laughed and made fun of each other, stole the plan, and handed it over to the boss. With the information received, a deal had already been struck with the first prince, shaking his hand and accepting. Approaching the door, immersed in his thoughts, he stopped when the guard greeted him. The girl never woke up. Entering the room, I saw Charlotte buried in bed, sitting next to Fiona. The maids bowed. The Duchess, surrounded by flowers, lay motionless. Her sleep was deep. Ernst saw flowers. This is the third prince, said the maid. The princess should definitely wake up from the smell of these flowers. The girl was constantly near. She blamed herself, covered her face with her hands, cried. If she hadn't left without permission, none of this would have happened. Ernst's sad eyes focused on the girl. He ordered her to be taken away. He would stay here. He called his wife, but the heroine was sleeping. The blush on her cheeks and her steady breathing indicated a deep sleep. The man blamed himself. The idiot couldn't save her twice. When his first wife was dying, he swore he would never love anyone again, but Fiona attracts his gaze. The Duke tried to avoid the woman, not to think or look. From the beginning, he should have stayed in the east wing. I looked out the window. It's time to put things in order. The man mumbled, looking ahead, nodding to his thoughts in his head. To change everything as the girl wants, so that no traces of the past remain, the mansion filled with the light of the setting sun, saying goodbye to this day. He put his embarrassed face on the bed, next to the girl's hand, and asked her to finally wake up. Hearing her name, the girl opened her green eyes, stared intently at something, and remained silent. She abruptly jumped from the Duke's lap. She didn't understand where she was and what was happening. Trying to get up, they were sitting in a green clearing, next to a basket of food. The last thing the heroine remembered was how the Duke ran to her. She screamed, lost consciousness again, scolded herself, and assumed it was another dream showing the future. Ernst was alarmed. He shielded her from the sun, saw that she was holding her head, and began to ask her about her well-being. She became sad, remembered all the words he threw at her, but the man took her and sat her on his lap. Interrupting the torment, they now faced each other. The girl sank into his shoulder, her eyes welled up, clutching the fabric of his shirt, and she didn't want to go back. 3 weeks passed. Fiona continued to sleep peacefully in her bed, and Ernst remained constantly close to her. He touched her hand and told her that so much time had passed, it was time to wake up. He buried himself in the bed, bowed his head, his hand was on hers. Emotions and anxiety had covered the man all this time. Suddenly, the heroine sat up in bed, looked at her husband in surprise, exhaled, and barely audibly uttered his name. The young man shouted in surprise. The princess woke up, regained consciousness, and jumped out of her chair. Fiona's cheeks flushed. She didn't know how long the Duke had been here, but she could see he was worried. And he also addressed her by name. She laughed. Apparently they were happy to see her, as you called her by name, covered her mouth with her hand in embarrassment, and decided to check if the restriction had been lifted, as the man's behavior had changed. He saw that the girl was trying to tell him something. He stopped and asked her if everything was all right with her. She lowered her head, hiding her sad eyes. There was still a restriction. It was unknown when it would be lifted. She exhaled sharply. Her face darkened. She couldn't do anything. She was annoyed by it. Apparently, their meeting after a long separation would not take place today. She smiled. She raised her head. The boy sat on the chair, but did not take his hand off the bed. The conversation did not go well. Then Fiona asked about the little one. But the Duke did not want to develop this topic either. He suggested postponing it until she felt better. But the princess became uneasy and began to suspect. 2 days later, she realized her suspicions were true. Charlotte would not see her. Saphira confirmed it, awkwardly hiding her eyes. The heroine opened her mouth, surprised by what she heard. The cake she was chewing jumped from her hands, leaving crumbs on the bed. She screamed, clenching her fists. She didn't understand. Because the girl was nearby, while the princess was unconscious. The maid tried to speak softly, but her voice struck her ears. Her words seemed loud. Because of the guilt that gnawed at the little lady, everyone knows, Saphira continued, that the Duchess sacrificed herself to save her. They are even called the Great Savior. Charlotte shed tears. She considered herself guilty, and the woman did not regain consciousness for a week. She was constantly nearby and prayed. Realizing how easily she was allowed to take the blame, the girl began to seethe. Redness appeared on her face due to anger, and she was also left near the bed. Her face darkened. She had many questions for the teacher. How did she allow something like this to happen? In this world, the role of a mentor is very important. It is she who is involved in education, not the nanny. Charlotte would not have blamed herself if Rachel had taken on her responsibilities and had explained everything to the lady in time. Several days passed, and Charlotte still didn't want to be seen, lying on the bed, her arms spread to the sides. The princess cried about this. Like a small child, she hit with her hands. She would have found it herself. But due to bed rest, she couldn't. Her muscles had weakened. Hearing a strange sound from the man, the girl jumped up. She extended her hands. Ernst smiled. It was quite strange. The man began to deny, but the princess listened, even though she tried to convince him that it seemed so. Fiona thought. She brought her finger to her cheek. Last time he called her by name, and now he smiled. The young gentleman now works in her bedroom. The girl decided to do something with Rachel. She needed to change teachers. She informed him, and he agreed with her. Everything is as she wishes. The heroine didn't think Ernst would be so understanding. She chewed the cake. She hoped for a speedy recovery, so she could meet Charlotte and eat sweets. Fiona remembered her gift because she bought it on a walk with the girl. Now she could give her the gift, beautifully wrapped in emerald paper, and asked her to come closer. When Ernst approached her and sat on a chair, the heroine got up and asked him to close his eyes. Upon opening his eyes, the boy saw a clothing accessory. This ornament can be placed on a naval uniform and is often given by loved ones, a lover or a relative. He held the box in his hands, and his cheeks turned red. Surprised by such a gift, he didn't hear the lady's question. He jumped out of the chair, put the gift on the bed, and covered his face with his hand. Fiona was alarmed and worried, not understanding what was happening to the man. Without removing his hands from his face, he muttered gratitude and quickly moved away from her, muttering that everything was fine. Ernst left, and the heroine remained standing. She was curious why he suddenly became so cold. A guess occurred to her. Apparently the man remembered Gabriella, and now he left without looking back. But Fiona couldn't be alone. The door opened, a smiling Sebastian entered, and immediately congratulated the girl. His Majesty's friend learned that the princess was dreaming of the future, and he was very interested in it. The lady accepted this calmly. The assistant came to discover the whole truth. He remembered the words she spoke before fainting. He had no intention of interrogating her, but force could help the master, he shouted, opening his arms. Fiona laughed. She didn't know how to control this power, which she informed the man about. Sebastian smiled. He understood that the lady was not as simple as she seemed. He pressed her and began to tell her about his love for this place to clear up doubts. Standing opposite each other, they wore sweet smiles, but they would use everyone who was useful to the duchy. The girl gets lost in her thoughts, while her predictions are uncontrollable. But if she doesn't want to see the future, she immediately returns to reality. I asked the man about the family heirloom, if he knew the details, and found information about the snake in the library. She clasped her hands. Perhaps the girl decided her abilities were related to this. Sebastian asked the final question about abilities. He was curious why the lady was sure they were related to the mansion's legends. She smiled. She brought her hand to her lips. She tilted her head to the side. She was the first to ask. She first wanted to know the man's opinion. The legend spoke of the right and left sides, of the front and back. This meant time. The only thing that doesn't age is darkness. That's why people believe that those who possess the Duke's family heirloom will never grow old. The first prince collected sacred objects from all over the country to ascend the throne. If he believed the heirloom had such a property, he would definitely have obtained it. And finally, whoever takes possession of the heirloom will become emperor of everything. He will be able to unite day and night. Fiona's marriage is likely to contribute to obtaining this heirloom. The girl suggested. Now it was the boy's turn to ask, rising above her. He repeated the question about the connection and began to wait for an answer. The heroine wondered if she could imply that she was Gabriella. When she started seeing the future, the spell weakened. I decided to try. I turned to the man. He was very suspicious. He laughed and replied that he was proud of her caution. She burst out laughing. Then he suspected her only in a positive way, in the most optimistic scenario, which is impossible to believe. Sebastian felt embarrassed and meekly agreed. He would try to think of the girl that way. Upon leaving, the assistant turned to the princess and told her that the heirloom had disappeared 6 years ago, and it could no longer be found. To others, it was a secret. Left alone, the girl became sad. The heirloom had disappeared, and she looked ahead with a lost gaze. I sat on the bed and thought, going through different options in my head. But in the end, I didn't know what to do. The strong voice of the third prince startled her out of her thoughts, who called her and spoke indignantly about her deafness. She screamed, holding a cup of tea in her hands. The liquid spilled. The young man was angry. After sending her so many flowers, so much gratitude from her. She smiled. That was their job. Her brother arranged a meadow of flowers for her, as if it were not a bed. Christian entered. He personally brought an invitation to a tea party. Surprised by this action, she was curious where this invitation came from. The invitation was from the boy's grandmother. Apparently, she was very surprised by this story about the lady. Although she belongs to the forces of the day, she is the mind of the night. So the grandmother considered it worthy to attend the tea party. Fiona looked at the letter. Although this woman had authority, the content of the letter was arrogant and rude. She smiled. The lady understood that such content would hurt and shake the princess, but she sent it anyway. She held it in her hands, laughed. It was still as correct as ever. Christian looked at the girl strangely. He bowed his head and announced that the tea party would take place in 2 weeks. But if the princess did not recover and ignored her hint, everything was fine with her. The conversation revolved around the lady's well-being, but her age shows her back hurts. The man said. Suddenly, the heroine remembered the medicine and also remembered the magician she met after shopping with Ire. After that, she and the cook even prepared vegetarian dishes, especially for the young man, hoping that he would remember the help and thus be able to help her too, and find a cure for her back. She lay down on the bed. Finally, the time came to meet Ernst, and the girl decided to speak. The dark sky was dotted with small stars. Inhaling the fresh night air, the Duke stood on the balcony. Fiona came out onto the balcony, her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes narrowed, and a basket on her hands at her back. He turned to her upon seeing the extended basket and was surprised that there was so much food for him alone. He took the food and began to scold the girl because she was simply ill, and her legs hurt. As soon as the man said these words, his legs gave way and he hugged her. It was indeed many steps. The lady was trembling. She began to apologize, but strong hands grabbed her waist and pulled her closer. He lifted her and sat her on the balcony. Fiona's legs wrapped around the man, the air escaped, and her mouth opened slightly. And at that moment, the girl decided to ask about her. She asked her husband to tell her about the one he could not forget. Ernst hesitated. He looked directly at her. He was afraid of hurting her with his words, but the heroine assured him that her words would not offend him. Sad eyes looked away. A man about whom a man does not want to make a memory, so that someone would block it, but looking at Fiona, he longed to retract his words. The man wanted to tell her something completely different. The mansion's hall was destroyed, so it would need to be rebuilt, and he asked her to change the house to her liking. He looked at the girl, apologized for being stupid, smiled, and she could forgive him. The Duke looked at her, and the lady's thoughts were occupied with how she could apologize with such a beautiful face. And his shirt was also unbuttoned, revealing his body. When he received the gift, Ernst began to avoid her. He avoided her at all dinners and kept his distance. That's why today I prepared sandwiches for him. Despite the pain the man was going through, I was able to be the first to apologize. She laughed, looked away. Of course she forgives him. She smiled sweetly. Her cheeks blushed. Removing his hands from her, he wanted to show the girl something else. She was waiting for permission. Showing curiosity, it was interesting. The Duke took her to the cliff of a terrible pit. Now they are inside the cave of the House of Turtles. Fiona asked about this house. She was surprised by such a cute name, but the cave was scary. The name did not fit. Ernst took the girl in his arms. He asked her to hold on tight. They began to descend into the depths. She screamed in fear and held him tightly by the shoulders. It was terrifying, but I opened one eye a little to look around. There was no certainty that they were falling. There was a feeling as if they were frozen in the air. The man explained about the airflow that helps them descend gently. I didn't think there was such a place in the duchy. 6 years ago, the guy didn't tell him. Ernst slowly sank to the ground. The skirts of the dress lifted and they arrived, still with the girl in his arms. He helped her down. He supported her from behind. She was very surprised. She couldn't wait to know how the man found this place. He walked to the door without turning around. He said accidentally, he found the cave a year ago on a rainy spring day. The end of the long winter and the time when Gabriella died. Memories flew by for both the man and the girl. The princess looked intently at Ernst, held on as best she could, but really suggested that she wanted to die without knowing what thoughts tormented Fiona. He continued talking about tourism. The butler let slip. Having finally mastered the lock, he opened the door a little, letting in a bright light that would be enough for the Duke to throw it. Without finishing the sentence, he opened the door completely and showed the gold, thinking that for tourism development this would be enough. The lady's eyes widened. She screamed, her mouth opened. It was a real treasure island. There was everything here, land documents, ancient artifacts. The heroine now understood where the money for such an expensive boutique came from. With this gold, you can create a small kingdom. The current fortune, these treasures, came to Ernst as a result of battles with pirate ships. She approached the man. She didn't understand why he was showing her this place, and if it turned out she was a spy. Without turning around, Ernst knew she was not a spy. And not only that, he was sure that the rumors about her stupidity were nonsense. She laughed so they caught her. She fell before him. They didn't really hide it. It was the answer for her. This was the first step towards their relationship. The Duke finally opened up. He offered me his hand. She wanted to see him again. Fiona was happy to meet him and told the man about it. Ernst looked at her and couldn't take his eyes off her. I kissed the girl's hand. I complimented her. I was delighted with her intelligence. She blushed. It was pleasant to hear that. At that moment, the man was sitting and writing a letter. He couldn't ask to meet naturally. One by one, the sheets were crumpled and thrown in the trash. The magician was impressed with the Duchess. She left a good impression on him after the meeting and even sent him a cook. And now, a request has been sent to find a cure for her back. Strange feelings overwhelmed Jurian. He even thought he was in love. His cheeks turned red from such thoughts. But first, he needed to check the messages. He took out a magic ball and was pleased. I deleted some messages without opening them. I found one that would be suitable for the most beautiful lady. The pen passed over a sheet of paper. A young man crossed the table towards him through the window, scolding him because he had never learned to talk to people. A young man with blonde hair and red eyes, Dante, the owner of the magic tower. The guy grabbed Jurian by the chest, shook him, wondering why he had written in 2 years. He squinted to the side. He didn't have the strength to communicate, followed by a response. This one was surprised by this, exclaimed that he was 10 years older than his brother, and rebuked him for growing up too much. Dante took his hand away. It was enough for him that his little brother was alive, and his father had even set a reward for him. But he noticed that the young man was writing a letter to the girl. He asked her several times about the appearance of the bride, but Yuri was in love with her magic. That's why he wanted to meet her. The brother smiled. It would be nice if they were together and rejoiced for him, but he grabbed the letters. And he began to mutter. The young man put his hand on his head, patted him, and, still hidden, reprimanded his younger brother. The man also went out the window. He turned around and told the boy to contact Ingrid through a magic ball. She wants to see him. Buried in his hands, Yuri thought about what love does to people, whether everyone really loses their minds over it. But a new rumor began to spread in the Duke's mansion. Everyone gathered around the princess, who was holding a letter in her hands. The Duchess received a love letter from the magician. The news spread very quickly throughout the house. The girl was holding a love letter. She was angry and scolded this boy, Urian. She took the letter, clenched it in her hand. He had been sending these letters for a long time. He was upset in his messages because the princess didn't make time for him. The magician presented the medicine. It was easy to open it, press it, and say its name. The girl read the next message. His skills were simply excellent, as he made such medicine, and furthermore he had a lot of cheek, since he could send such letters to a married woman. She didn't understand why a personal meeting was important to him. She squeezed the letter tighter and was angry with Judy. And then came the day when the lady went for tea with Lady Belmore, and everyone came out to see her off. Ernst accompanied her to the carriage. He wanted to have a good time. He hid his feelings, but the princess still noticed. Then she remembered that Gabriella died in a carriage accident. Apparently, the man also remembered this moment. When saying goodbye to his wife, he repeated that she should not follow strangers. It was amusing for the girl. She was being taught like a small child. She squinted to the side. She was reminded of many perverts nearby, and also heard rumors about Judy. Fiona laughed. For her sake, Ernst played the role of a jealous husband to show everyone that their relationship was developing. Already sitting in the carriage, the princess reassured the man she saw the prediction. And she already knows everything. She laughed wildly and assured Ernst that nothing would happen to the carriage. That she would live, she assured him. The man was embarrassed. There was some awkwardness between them. Fiona had to be careful. Suddenly lifting her head, the princess saw the girl and her teacher approach timidly, and wished her a happy journey. With her head bowed, Charlotte was still depressed. The heroine even envied such perseverance. The girl got into the carriage with the princess, still not lifting her head, fiddling with the fabric of her dress with her hands. The girl waved her hand. She was happy. Now she would have the opportunity to talk to the little lady. She hoped they would become closer. The princess wanted to share her secret with Charlotte, but the girl tried not to look at her. But Fiona still smiled. In fact, when the pirates entered the mansion, she already knew it, because she saw the future in a dream. Even if this doesn't happen every night, but then everything became clear. She thinks it was all to save the little lady. If she is in danger again, she will definitely save her again. Charlotte clasped her hands in her lap. The girl didn't understand why her mistress was so kind to her. She sat closer to her, reached out and touched her cheek. The girl meant a lot to her. She didn't forget the warm scarf and smiling when she needed care. The most important reason is love. Love for this little lady. She hugged her tightly, pressing her to her chest, because the girl had become another member of her family. But if the princess ends up in danger instead of Charlotte, then don't worry. Everything is planned. I tried to hide my scar on my neck. Under no circumstances should she show it to the girl. She dried Charlotte's tears, which dripped from her eyes in large drops, but the girl was happy to be able to comfort her. Ernst was reading important documents at that moment, but his thoughts were focused on Fiona, recalling their conversation, trying to understand how she found out about Gabriella's death. Sebastian, hearing the boy's reasoning, shouted, "She knows too much." But the Duke was not sure. The man's hand trembled, and he asked his friend if he believed that a soul could pass into another person's body. The assistant formulated the Duke's thoughts more clearly. Lady Gabriella's soul transferred to Fiona's body. He rested his hand on her cheek. Sebastian couldn't be sure, but the world hasn't been explored yet. This can happen and will happen. He lowered his gaze, suggesting asking the magician. The man asked again. "You just need to find one." Ernst immediately remembered a person. "There is one in the duchy who constantly flirts with Fiona." The man's face darkened, moving the pile from one place to another. He didn't want to talk to this magician about the princess. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. He couldn't concentrate on business, because his thoughts were completely dominated by the lady. He jumped up. He didn't like everything. Taking the cloak, he would follow. It would be better to be there on the way back. He didn't like Fiona, but he valued her. The heroine and Charlotte were in the water. The girl hugged her tightly so she wouldn't drown. What should they do? "Let the current take her," shouted the princess, trying to hold on to her and the child. The heroine wondered how this happened, because everything was fine. They arrived for tea, but when they were traveling in a boat, it capsized. The people in the clearing were moving further and further away. Panic seized Fiona. Fear took hold of her. Charlotte raised her eyes to the girl. Tears darkened her gaze. She was scared and asked the girl hopefully why they would be saved. She smiled at her. She tried to contain her good mood. "Everything will be fine," she assured her. She knew with firm confidence that she would save the girl and would not die herself. Under no circumstances would she give the mistress such pleasure. 2 hours ago, everything was fine at the estate. The princess was greeted by the lady and her court. The woman greeted the young duchess. She bowed her head slightly. She leaned on her cane. Wrinkles accumulated on her face, but a restrained smile appeared. Formal wear is not as fashionable as before. The heroine concluded her observations very soberly and economically. The lady smiled. The smile was sincere. She heard about the lady's merits and virtues. She would like to know this. "I decided to behave well with the woman, like a grandmother with her granddaughter, of course. Many will think that the girl wants to raise her status in her eyes," she thought, but it was not so. In fact, Fiona was happy to see them all. The mistress pulled her out of her thoughts, coughed into her fist, and asked her to follow. They walked to the water, saw skillful boats. Belmore's boats were proud. The lady explained. Charlotte, seeing the boats, opened her mouth and shouted with joy. "You can see the underwater world through the transparent bottom." Lady Belmore said sadly that at her age she would no longer experience this pleasure. Embarrassed, Charlotte said that she, like her mistress, suffers from seasickness. The woman remembered the mistress, praised her. The girl behaved very well. Rachel blushed. The lady's words were pleasant. She ran to the old woman, took her hand, squeezed it, and smiled very sweetly. She was glad to be remembered. Fiona didn't like this. She smiled and took advantage of Rachel's situation to show off. The princess had a higher status than the mistress, but she was so easily excluded from the conversation that the girl became sadder. And the mistress kept testing her. "I took a few steps in new shoes." There are many ways to maintain dignity without changing the topic of conversation. With a sweet face, the girl gave a speech in which Charlotte knew ancient languages well. All thanks to Rachel's efforts. The mistress's eyes widened. She scolded the princess in her head, wondering how she knew about languages. Then, she didn't miss the opportunity to clarify the princess's knowledge of ancient languages, hoping the answer would be to her liking. She bit her finger. She was annoyed by the girl's answer. She thought she would appear better, but it didn't work. Terrible thoughts came to the mistress, but she was interrupted from her thoughts when she heard the Jalbur language. The princess easily answered questions in this strange language. Everything came out well for her. Free communication. Rachel was surprised by this. She didn't understand what was happening. The Duchess did it on purpose, the girl thought. She switched to an unknown language and skillfully excluded her from the conversation. But Rachel was angry and wouldn't give up on her so easily. The heroine heard that preparations for the boat games were complete, and that they could take their places. The mistress put her hand to her chest. She will sit next to Charlotte because she needs her. She turned to the woman. She saw that Fiona was also going with them. She laughed and asked in surprise to sit with them. And so the boat sets sail from the shore. A man steers it at the bow. The girls sit under a canopy for the sun. Rachel thought something was wrong. They were on the same boat, but she didn't dare to do what she wanted. I saw a whirlpool and thought that it would easily capsize the boat, and then the stupid Duchess would fall into the water in front of everyone. She brought her finger to her mouth, looked at the girl with a dark gaze, building an insidious plan of revenge in her head. Because the Princess of the Day Powers should not know how to swim, so she herself would save Charlotte from this helpless idiot. She smiled. Then she would become the center of attention, and not this stupidity. She smiled at the corners of her lips. The heroine had no idea of the mistress's thoughts, and laughed cheerfully with the mistress. Hearing something behind her, the princess turned around, screamed, and saw that they were skating. I saw Rachel waving her arms and falling. She screamed loudly. It was unexpected. Everything happened quickly. The boat capsized. Screams were heard. The mistress was still trying to grab the edges of the boat. It was necessary to save the lady. Charlotte fell into the water, drowning. She tried to save herself but couldn't. The girl was drowning. Rachel swam towards her. She grabbed her by the shoulders. She tried to keep her afloat. She asked about her well-being, but there was a smile on her face. She leaned her face closer, smiled, and said, "There is nothing to fear, the mistress will definitely save her." But the whirlpool had already captured the girl. Rachel's face darkened. She didn't have enough strength to save herself. Charlotte cried softly. The lady was already completely underwater. The girl was not herself. Let her stay underwater a little longer. She thought how the lady's servants would be nearby. Only then would she save her. Fiona turned her head, looking for the girl. She saw that the mistress had been helped, but Charlotte was nowhere to be seen. Finally, she saw the girl. And the way Rachel was holding her underwater, her face changed. A kind of obsession appeared. Fiona dived underwater, trying to catch the girl who was already sinking to the bottom. Darkness enveloped them. It was scary. She came out holding the girl by the elbow of her arm. She took a deep breath. She cleared her throat. Charlotte grabbed the hem of her dress and did not lift her head. The Duchess shouted and showed interest in the child's well-being, but when she learned from her that everything was fine, she calmed down. They needed to get out quickly before being sucked into the whirlpool, but the girl was exhausted. Raising her eyes, the girl exclaimed. In front of her was a stone island. It was close to her. She must try to reach it. They were able to reach land. The girl was sitting on the rocks. Fiona was trying to catch her breath. Too much energy had been spent. We looked around. Fishermen were resting here. When it got dark, the princess thought they had been here recently. She exhaled a sigh of relief. They stayed here for the night. The girl started a fire and now sat, looking at it with sad eyes, while the child slept covered with a cloak. Charlotte got up and started blaming herself, saying it was all her fault because of the curse. The heroine turned around. She grabbed the girl by the shoulders. She didn't understand what she was saying. Where did these thoughts come from in her head? Who was inspiring them? That's what the mistress said. And mother and father died because of Charlotte. She must listen to Rachel. That's what they ordered her to do. She punished her so she wouldn't speak to the master. Otherwise, she would be cursed. The branch in Fiona's hands cracked. She squeezed it so hard that anger boiled and raged within her. She pretended to help, but she herself dripped into the child's brain, using the curse as an excuse. The girl didn't understand how she could do this to a small child. She turned to the girl, who was still sleeping. She couldn't understand why Rachel could be so angry. The princess apologized several times to the sleeping woman. Suddenly, she was enveloped in a glow. Streaks of light swirled around her. She heard the sound of a clock, looked at the cave, beckoned, and called the girl inside. The Duchess decided to find out what was there. She approached and saw a stone wall. Consciousness clouded her. It was a stele with ancient writings. Fiona was surprised. She didn't expect to see something like this here. The girl read, "One must return to the beginning, to a time when it did not exist. Stop at the moment when it was not. Do not ask for an offering of more than 300 bowls of rice. Blood is the pledge of your promise." Fiona read to the end, her eyes wide open. She heard a loud shout. They called her by her name. The princess turned sharply, and her pink hair rose. The duke stood in front of her. He looked worried. Drops of sweat rolled down his cheeks, or perhaps they were tears. A red blush appeared on his cheeks. He clenched his teeth. His raised hand remained in the air. The man fell silent. Outside, the voices of the attendants were heard, informing Ernst that Milady was not outside. The man shouted, giving the order not to dare to enter. Otherwise, they would face punishment for disobedience. The princess cried out. Her wet clothes were visible, and her body was visible. She wrapped her arms around herself and lowered her head. She took off her jacket, threw it over her shoulders, straightened it, and apologized barely audibly. Leaving the cave, he took the little lady in his arms. She needed to return to the beach. Fiona looked at him with a sad gaze. She watched her husband leave. She was scared, but she endured for the sake of the child. She didn't understand the man's cold attitude towards her now. There was no need for so much hatred. Rachel jumped up and began to show concern, making excuses that she wanted to help Charlotte. But she was a bad swimmer and was now very glad that they had found the child. Although there was a smile on the girl's face, her eyes betrayed anger. She didn't understand how they managed to survive. At first, Rachel hoped, with the girl's help, to become a savior in the eyes of others. But then the water flow intensified. She alone could barely swim to shore. When the stupid Duchess went to save Charlotte, the lady expected her not to swim out. Hearing all this, Fiona's face darkened. She knew the truth, and now she didn't believe a single word from the mistress. She approached and slapped Rachel across the cheek. Shouting her name, the slap was loud. She held her red cheek with her hand and shouted what she was doing, but the princess intervened and asked her a question that shocked those present. She hit her again. Not only did she drown her pupil, but she also convinced her that she was cursed, and she was to blame for everything. She pronounced a verdict. From now on, Rachel has nothing to do with Charlotte. She must also try to go unnoticed. The Duchess was very angry. She kept shouting at the mistress. She had no right to work with children. How dare she say that the child's parents died because of the curse? Rachel clutched her chest and shouted indignantly that it was all a lie. The liar Charlotte had made it all up. As soon as I uttered these words, I fell silent. I realized I had gone too far. I heard Ernst's voice and asked again what she had said. The man's face darkened. The Count and Countess died with honor and dignity. How dare she say that to his daughter? The Duke handed the child over to his assistant, carefully and with care. Rachel was frightened and tried to justify herself. The girl screamed. She had taught the child for so many years. She had earned her trust. Her cheeks turned red from the shouting. Her large eyes looked offended. Darker than the clouds, the young gentleman said decisively about the judgment. Then the court will make the decision. He stepped on her. If his wife's words are true, she had better confess now, or she will have to pay for daring to insult not only Charlotte, but also her parents. He shouted, pointing his hand at the girl to grab her. The man was very angry. Every word spoken hurt him. The young men grabbed Rachel by the elbows. She struggled and didn't want to go with them, asking to be let go. She shouted to the Duke that she hadn't done anything, that she wasn't guilty, but no one listened to her. As a result, they stayed in Belmore's courtyard for the night. The character seemed sad. She lay down on the bed, hugging the pillow. There was nothing wrong with not returning home today. She was just worried about Ernst. After all, he left so quickly, thought the heroine that they grew closer. But the distance between them increased, which saddened her. Many troubles await her ahead. But the girl screamed and remembered the steel with the ancient letter. She jumped on the bed, sat on the edge. She forgot something so important that she needed to take care of it. But rice was mentioned there, so everyone will remember the folk tale and its blind character. Here, information about Ingrid and a method for treating nocturnal nausea is probably hidden. We need to go back to the time when the disease did not exist. Fiona was delighted. She managed to solve its riddle. When she was still Gabriella, she was looking for something that could replace the glowing herb. Although the extracted drops only slowed the course of the disease, and it was impossible to restore vision after its loss. But if it is possible to go back in time, when light shone in her eyes, then perhaps her vision will return. Everything can be corrected. According to the last line, the solution is already close. The Duke has a relic that was loved by the sea goddess. This relic can help with treatment. She squeezed the pillow tighter, closed her eyes. She needed to sort out her thoughts and tell Ernst everything. She didn't want to act stupidly like Gabi. The appearance of a man with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine surprised the young woman. She remembered asking Sophia for something strong, and apparently he brought it. The delighted girl nodded. It was good that he came. She wanted to discuss something with him. They were both on the terrace, sitting at the table. The wine had already been poured into the glasses. The breeze caressed their faces. The girl was embarrassed. Ernst spoke first. He ran his finger along the glass. Rachel got her just deserts. 8 years for endangering Charlotte by pretending she couldn't swim. For the terrible words with which she poisoned the child, the sentence increased to 10 years. Fiona listened attentively. There will also be an additional penalty for desecration of the dead. The lady laughed. An ideal solution. A man wanted to ask his wife how she managed to save the child. She was able to start a fire and light a signal fire, where she learned to make a distress signal. They also covered the child to prevent hypothermia, where they found a blanket on a deserted island. Where could it have been? Ernst wondered, asking his wife. Although Fiona belongs to the day forces, she is an excellent swimmer and can do things they shouldn't be able to do. The man looked at her intently. Perhaps this is due to the gift of foresight. The surprised lady in the wine glass reflected. I had no foresight, she replied simply. She tried to say it because she had no time to hesitate. In such a situation, Charlotte could die. She squeezed his hand on the table. Fiona didn't want to say anything wrong. She knew it and understood it, but still didn't like it. He raised his voice to the girl. Why was she so careless? The man was angry, as if they had already died once. The parallel was drawn again. This line of thought was familiar to him, Gabriella, whom he always misses. He raised his head and asked directly. She, Gabi, his wife, should finally find out the truth. He demanded an answer right now, that she say she was Gabriella. They sat opposite each other. He narrowed his eyes. A blush appeared, her back tensed, waiting for an answer, but he didn't rush her. She lowered her head. Ernst finally recognized her, but she couldn't help but utter a word and shake her head, cursing herself, blaming the shackles. The man got angry, clenched his fist, shouted. He didn't understand why she was silent. Because there was so much evidence around, he demanded an answer from the princess. But the girl couldn't say who she was. These damn shackles didn't allow it. Only her face turned red as she tried to say it. A loud exhale came from the boy. He looked away without seeing and began to get up. He left. The princess must have been tired. She lowered her head. She didn't lift it. The man clenched his fists and apologized for showing himself in such a terrible way. They simply reminded him of Gabriella. She smiled. Changing bodies, of course. This is impossible. As if she had said it to herself. Ernst left, leaving the girl alone. She jumped up. Now she understood that he would not seek a wife in her. She felt they were starting to drift apart. She looked at the closed doors. She would return to that image of Gabriella. Realizing it saddened her. A few months later, it was very hot outside. As if true summer had arrived. Soon there was to be an event organized by Fiona, a masked ball. The maids rejoiced at this and praised the lady. Organizing a festival for common people was a great idea. Let's get to work. They depend on her from now on. They were happy and considered Fiona the best, but her eyes were sad. The girls whispered, realizing that things were still cold between the princess and the master, and they were upset. After they stopped communicating, her mistress began to stare into space for a long time. Her gaze seemed to dim, but she tried not to show it. After saving Charlotte, the rumor spread among the servants that the child was under the protection of the sea goddess. Sophia was very worried about her. Fiona turned around, stopping the maid's whispers, and clarified about the letter to the first prince that they were sending to each other. She smiled. We have to try to do it well. She trusts the girl, because I saw how brilliant she was. If the girl does it well, the princess will be delighted and will give her a dress with jewels for the party. Sophia shouted. She clenched her fists and waved them. She would try hard, was the answer. The girl smiled gratefully. I looked out the window. It was already summer. How quickly time passed. She couldn't believe it. One season gave way to another, ever since she and Ernst stopped communicating. She had a great desire to lighten her burden. But in Fiona's body, it's hard to find someone she can be sincere with. Only Sophia and Christina were with her. Only they were always there. The boy was like a shadow, constantly following the girl. I turned to the boys. Deadly boredom. Now they will hear something interesting. There was a couple. They started a story. That they came to an agreement, a marriage of convenience. But the husband always treated me very well. Wherever he was, he always remembered his wife and constantly brought her flowers. Everyone admired their couple. The man was so caring that he even helped her put on her shoes. The girls exclaimed in surprise, amazed at how much one could love like that. Fiona stopped her story and nodded. It was love, that's right. She smiled bitterly. She didn't understand it then. Christian looked up and looked at her intently. The maids shouted what happened next, impatiently demanding the continuation of this wonderful story. The man lost his memory. He became cold towards his wife. He was no longer attentive to her. And the bedroom was no longer filled with the scent of the flowers he used to send. Fiona answered frankly, before the husband did everything for his wife. But due to his political views, the girl could not trust him. She looked out the window. There were many memories of the man's love that she received. They filled her heart, making it beat ever stronger. Now she needs to meet her husband halfway. Now the boy understands how difficult it was for him to meet her halfway. Now she saw him. The maid exclaimed that wherever you look, it was not hard or unpleasant for her husband. She smiled and didn't suspect that the story was about her mistress. She raised her finger and pointed, because this is how love manifests. Then the other person will definitely understand it. If she were in the man's place, she too would give him all her love. Closing her eyes in embarrassment, a blush appeared on her cheeks. Fiona laughed into her fist. She knows that loving isn't that scary, loving alone. She thanked the maid for her words. It's enough to love, she understood. She took a step forward. It pushes her away now, but she will try to get closer. She headed for the door, without turning back, and announced that she had to go to Ernst's room. Christian tried to stop the girl. He held out his hand to her. Her story felt so familiar. Where did I hear it? She turned around. Her smile was wide. She didn't remember. Perhaps she heard it somewhere, or, having experienced it herself, she answered with ease. Christian was confused. He asked again. So it turns out she was Gabriella, he said, and he himself didn't believe it. The girl came to Ernst's office to talk about the steal, which she hadn't had a chance to talk about before. But that she knew, he wasn't there today. Sebastian appeared nearby. The master was not there. But if you need anything, he can help you. Fiona placed her hand on the table. Now she will need him too. She will be able to talk to him about the steal. When the man began to say that the Duke's relic was missing, the girl smiled. She didn't seem foolish. After the death of his ex-wife Gabriella, Sebastian prevented his friend's cremation and insisted on a burial. He was surprised that the woman had interesting logic. Don't worry that the first prince knows nothing about this. No one knew that before the girl's death, someone took her ring. Sebastian looked with a heavy gaze. His eyes were hidden by glasses, but a flash of understanding crossed them. In any case, it was cremated, Fiona continued. But since it is something sacred, it cannot simply be burned, so it is somewhere healthy and saved. The man raised his hand and adjusted his glasses. He didn't lie. That the relic was lost, disappeared was the truth. Or it was fake and burned in the fire. The guy suggested this. He thought about it himself. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and she asked again. It couldn't be that the ring had been transferred with her, and she had actually lost it. Fiona seemed scared. She couldn't believe it. She had lost control so easily. How did this happen? She closed her eyes and thought that Sebastian was not telling the truth out of distrust. But apparently the ring was indeed missing. Since the relic is missing, what to do with the steal? She exhaled sharply. Since her husband was not there, she decided to talk to his assistant. She asked for paper and a pencil. After a while, an image appeared. I need to learn a lot about this steal. She grabbed the papers, brought them closer to her eyes. Read them carefully. The girl waited, leaning on the table. He raised his eyes, smiled, offered to ask the magician for help, and winked mischievously. There is only one magician in the duchy, and it was Urian, the same one who sent love letters. In any case, the princess wanted to visit the hospital, which specializes in treating nocturnal nausea. The man laughed. Everyone in the room remembered the love letters. It would be good to visit there with the knight, Sebastian recalled. A risky idea. And it was with the man who sent letters, along with her husband. She doubted that even if she received a real love letter, he wouldn't care. Meeting Jurian is a great idea. The girl is interested in everything, especially her older brother. The genius, Dante, the owner of the magic tower, beckoned her to meet him. If you get his support, the problems facing the heroine can be easily resolved. She smiled, satisfied with her thoughts. She would definitely talk to Ernst. In the afternoon of the same day, the Duke, all soaked in sweat, fought with swords. A voice wondered if he had already made peace with the princess. Without being distracted from attack and defense, he fought, immersed in his sad thoughts. Sebastian sat in a chair and watched the battle. He exhaled air. He didn't understand why he was here now. The lady was just in her room, the man said. She doesn't know what happened, but it's best to make peace quickly. Everyone sees that a cat ran between them. Ernst muttered that it was rude to the princess. The assistant asked incomprehensibly. Seeing Gabriella in her was the answer. The Duke stopped and shook his head. He loves his wife too much. He cannot forget the girl, and it is better for Fiona to direct her feelings to someone else. He said, it is sad to realize that the gentleman will not be able to love anyone else. His dark eyes shone. He looked at his sitting friend. Since when does he treat Fiona condescendingly? He doesn't understand where he missed it. Sebastian smiled. He saw that he didn't like it. The Duke turned and headed for the exit, uttering a sharp no. His friend jumped up and followed him with his gaze. But it was already time, and they would see each other later. The more Sebastian talked with the lady, the more suspicion he had, nor was everything clear about the ring. She knew what Gabriella had swallowed. She also knew about the death of Ernst's wife, about the accident, although only high-ranking officials knew these things. And she knew anyway. He spoke of the funeral with such confidence, with such fervor, only he knew the content of the letter written by the Duchess. There was only one answer. Lady Fiona is actually Gabriella, the man finally guessed. I was tormented by doubts that the transmigration of souls was impossible. But this becomes the only explanation for her behavior. She is smart and not stupid at all, as the rumors about her said, and the success of her affairs proves that she has already been in the duchy, which means the lady is definitely Gabriella. Sebastian reasoned at length, and fruitfully. As a result, there is no point in distrusting or suspecting the princess, because this is her chance to get rid of the first prince. Morning came quite quickly for Ernst. He wanted to walk a bit, but in the end, he didn't sleep all night. A bird caught his attention. The owl flew directly towards the Duke. There was something around its neck. The owl perched on the man's sleeve. There was a red handkerchief around its neck, which meant an urgent letter from Gain. The letter stated that the person who approached the pirates was not the first prince. The criminal was the second prince, William. The target was Fiona. He clenched the letter tightly. Apparently, he suggested, the second prince really wants to die. The man was indignant. Ernst swore that if they killed the first prince, Wilhelm would easily ascend the throne. But everything changed when he chose Fiona as his target. Now the second prince will also have to be removed. In general, it would be good, he reasoned, for the throne to fall to the third prince, Johann. He doesn't want to harm the princess. Ernst's original plan was to interrupt the first prince's ceremony and gather military detachments. But since the second prince revealed himself in this way, it will be necessary to incite enmity between the brothers. It was necessary to distance himself further from Fiona if the Duke entered into a struggle for the throne, because if they found out that she had become a beloved person to him, it would open the house for the lady. He narrowed his eyes, remembering Gabriella's death. He should have done this immediately, the man thought. He couldn't push the princess away, but he also couldn't forget his ex-wife. Ernst was annoyed. He was simply wasting time stupidly. If he asked if he could forget Gabriella, he ignored his own thoughts. She was everything to him. It was always only her. He remembered how she offered him a marriage contract, smiling and extending her hand. Gabriella presented herself perfectly. She helped people understand and accept her. She was always right. The man was carried away warmly by the memories. The girl considered Ernst kind and brave, the defender of this land. She only saw the good, and he tried to live up to it. After such a difficult loss, the desire to improve disappeared. He became obsessed with revenge and fell into a trap. Fiona became exactly the person the Duke met when he was at his limit. She became his salvation. If Gabriella was the first, then the princess became another first. The boy had such thoughts and reasoning. He had a lot of time to think about it. He even thought they would become good friends, because she is very sweet and cheerful, until he saw her wet body. The man understood that he had to be careful, but all his thoughts were spinning, and he realized that they could not be friends. He looked at the rising sun. There was a thought in his head. How could I fall in love so quickly? I quickly managed to melt my heart, just like Gabriella. Ernst walked down the hallway, clenching his fists. The girl followed in her wife's footsteps, but as long as Gabai is in his heart, there is no room for Fiona. But still, in the princess's presence, his heart became restless. He entered the room, where the one who occupied his thoughts slept serenely. The man made a decision, but could not be sane by her side. He pulled the blanket, covering the lady. Opening her eyes, she saw Ernst in front of her, embarrassed, holding a blanket in his hands to cover him. But she froze at his gaze. Rubbing her eyes, the girl asked when he arrived. She waited a long time, but nothing happened. She even fell asleep. Her face changed, becoming serious. He wondered what was such an important matter that it could not wait to be delayed. Joyfully, she asked to go with him to the hospital to get the results of the research on a cure for nocturnal nausea. And she stared, waiting for an answer. The man immediately remembered the research team, namely the magician who sent Fiona love letters. However, if he has a loved one, he will be happier. The answer was that, unfortunately, he had a lot to do, so they couldn't go together. It was unlikely. It will be better this way, the princess asked again, not understanding. Her mouth opened slightly at what she heard. She seemed surprised. She received an offer from her husband to find a lover. The girl asked the boy again, as if she hadn't heard him the first time. The Duke uttered the words, they burned. He doesn't care if she finds a lover. The young man believed that Fiona would be suitable for someone who was not burdened by memories of his ex-wife. Noble, untouched, and ideal. Calling her husband by his full name, she asked if he would regret his words. She covered her eyes with her hand. It was difficult to answer. He cleared his throat. There is no reason to worry. Among the soldiers, there are many worthy people, Ernst hinted. If the princess doesn't mind, he himself can send someone. He suggested, and the girl became tense and looked angrily at her husband. Confused, he must let Fiona go, not hold her back. He cannot be close when his whole life is tied to revenge. Fiona exploded. She called Ernst the biggest idiot. The man will divorce as soon as everything is over. Slamming the door, she sat up straight on the floor. Everything was wrong, very wrong. How could such a thought of a lover come to his mind? The princess blushed. She couldn't even get angry, because it wasn't about another woman, but about his past. The only thing she could do was cry. She got angry and stood up. If he gets close to him, it will only get worse. Now it is unclear what she should do. She cried out, standing up. She shouted loudly about her lover so that they would hear. He will surely start. Christian appeared silently, seeing the nervous lady, and asked about her well-being. But seeing tears in her eyes, he was surprised, although he asked many questions at first. He immediately stopped in his tracks, not understanding what had happened. Taking her to the room, he calmed her down, patting her back with his hand, and worrying about the girls. Christian assured that the Duke didn't mean it, just a bad temper, but the princess echoed him. Now this will not stop. The young man left the door, closed it. They would pretend that nothing had happened, and when Fiona calmed down, she would come out to him. The maids were going to clean, but they saw a man leaving the princess's room. They froze and exhaled. They whispered they recognized Christian. He was there with someone, but when they saw Fiona, they exhaled sharply and fell silent. And throughout the mansion, rumors spread that the eldest Belmore and the princess were lovers. The servants whispered in every corner. Sebastian held a letter in his hand that there was a rumor. He laughed, he remembered. Gabriella always looked for Christian when she was sad. Apparently, this time the gentleman offended her. Now, Ernst's reaction to this rumor was interesting. He looked at him with a question. He did not show this letter, but laughed, waving an invitation to a masked ball. That will be soon. He said the lady was so beautiful that all men's gazes would be on her, but he thought he was already imagining it. The Duke darkened his face. His hands clenched a sheet of paper. Sebastian suggested assigning Colonel Annette to her. Lifting his head, Ernst thought, his friend continued that they were from the same family, so it would be appropriate. He would take care of her and could be with her everywhere. The gentleman's thoughts were racing. He himself had offered to find a lover, and the ball was simply a great opportunity. Sebastian joked, saying that suddenly someone would enter her room while the girl was changing clothes. There was also a second prince who could harm Fiona, manipulate her, and therefore, she was in danger, but it was better to be prepared for it. A barely perceptible smile appeared on his lips. All this is being done just for her, so it's a good idea. A friend tried it, but her knight Christian needs to be given another job. A valuable cargo must be taken to the palace, only work for him. He will send documents to the first prince about the second, and what the first is doing. Little by little, the plan comes into action, enmity between them. The beautiful princess was sitting in front of a cup of tea. Her eyes were very sad. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Charlotte babbled, cheerfully sharing the upcoming event, saying that at the masquerade ball there was a prize for the best couple. Colonel Annette often received this prize for the best male costume, and the girl continued to share it. The boy chatted, saying that the colonel was the best, and that he would only marry someone as handsome as him. Fiona sat with a faraway look, staring at the table. Charlotte noticed that something was wrong with the princess and asked about her well-being. She was probably very worried about the ball. The heroine smiled. She turned to her. It was time for her nap. They were going to rest. The girls sat on the bench. Charlotte rested her head on the lady's lap, and she, in turn, touched the young lady's hair with her hand. When the baby fell asleep, Johann crossed his arms over his chest and ordered her to tell the girl that he was willing to listen. The man knew that Fiona was crying. The question occurred to him. It was the Duke's fault. She could be angry with him. The girl laughed. She was happy about her brother's concern. She thanked him and called him in a way the boy didn't like, brother. The man's next words silenced Fiona, making her blush. He discovered that she was not his sister. The young man knew the truth that the real Fiona had disappeared, so the girl sitting in front of him was not his sister. She appeared later. She stared at him. Now the third prince knows that she is not a princess. The hand on the girl's head froze. On the eve of her wedding, she asked the heroine for help. At first, he thought it was complete nonsense, but then he realized it was all true. The girl needs to be happy. Since she in Fiona's body has no right to be sad, an order was received. If the princess knew that another would appear in her body, then it was not fate. Perhaps it wasn't her fault. The boy continued trying to find out her real name, because she is a former duchess. And the third prince revealed the girl's secret. Colonel Annette stood near the tree. He heard the conversation between the prince and the princess. He now seemed disheartened, not believing what he was hearing. What does all this mean? I heard the whole conversation, but still didn't understand how it was possible. He moved even closer to the lady, who dared not look up at the young man, who was expecting an answer to his question. He asked the lady to answer, to confirm or deny that the prince's words were true. But the girl remained silent, also without lifting her head. She could not say that she was Gabriella. She didn't deny it, but there was no confirmation either. A guess pierced the man. Since she is silent, it means it is so. She cannot say it in words. Then Annette shouted about her wound, which remained after she decided to save the cat. On which hand, he asked. The princess smiled and turned her head towards the young man, as expected from him, satisfied with herself. Because the question was tricky, it was not his arm that was injured, but his left leg. And indeed, Annette was saving Christian, not the cat, and received burns on her left leg on the ship. Surrounded by pirates. The request was to keep everything secret, but now I could know. The colonel pressed his hand to his chest. She was definitely Gabriella. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The girl was right. The boy had unpleasant memories. They all agreed to keep it a secret. The princess could not know about such a secret. He apologized for not being able to recognize the duchess immediately, and knelt on one knee. Apologizing, he placed his thin hand on her forehead. There were big changes, but he wouldn't torment her with questions. It didn't matter in what form the girl returned. The main thing was that he wouldn't leave her again. The heroine was happy, embarrassed. A tear fell from behind her closed eyes, and finally they recognized her. A voice was heard from the same tree. It was Christian who was now shouting, who heard everything. He was angry that they decided to hide everything from him. He was sobbing loudly. Tears streamed from his eyes. He couldn't believe it was true. Lady Gabriella had returned, but he didn't understand. He acted like an idiot. They looked at the man and couldn't stop their moans. When the girl couldn't take it anymore and quietly called him by name. And Christian approached and knelt in front of his beloved lady. She looked attentively. She asked about the remnants of a handkerchief. He lifted his face in surprise to the princess. He remembers it too. A handkerchief with the lady's initials, red. The guy kept it so carefully that envious people stole it and burned it before his eyes. The girl said all this, leaning towards him. She couldn't look up, listened to everything and remembered. There are no restrictions if you formulate the answer correctly. Don't use yourself. Not the whole scarf burned. Only the part with the initials remained. He continued the story. He put his hand on his chest. How does she know everything? Tears rolled down her beautiful face. Fiona was surprised when he showed her the rag. She wore it close to her heart. She was screaming and never parted with the handkerchief. The men shouted at each other. They asked the girl if she remembered this or that, and were embarrassed when she confirmed it. They listened to the third prince. She turned sharply towards him. This indignant man reprimanded the boys for how they were behaving. If Fiona had been in his body, they would have behaved unpleasantly towards her. He put his hand under his chin, leaned down with a barely perceptible smile, and he began to listen. He knew for sure that they wouldn't treat the princess very well, because she is the strength of the day. Christian smiled in response. Johann had never considered Fiona a sister, and now he didn't understand why the prince wanted to appear in a good light. A scandal almost broke out, but the heroine touched the boy's sleeve, calmed him down, and she didn't want him to treat her brother badly. Moreover, thanks to the prince, the boys recognized her. He was not an enemy. The girl assured him and asked him to treat her properly. She demanded that the boys promise her this, putting her hand on her chest, obeying the order, and looking at each other. Christian asked when the Duchess would tell Ernst and Sebastian. They were very saddened by what had happened. The girl looked away. They should have found out, but she couldn't say it in person. She couldn't state the reason at this time. She was convinced that the Duke would not believe the boys if they told him themselves. He would think that the princess was impersonating Gabriella. Until she had proof, she could only remain silent. The person who can help solve all this is a magician. Fiona warned the boys that she needed to meet the magician. Christian objected in surprise, confirming that it was precisely with the magician who sent the girl love letters. This is a very dangerous, indignant man. That guy looks at the lady like that, Christian muttered with disgust. Fiona not only wanted to meet him, but also to know how the investigation was going. She stroked the boy's hair and calmed him down. It was already getting dark, and the princess and the children were sitting at the table, eating and drinking. The wine flowed like a river, and the children were drunk. Annette said that from tomorrow, she would take care of the lady. Christian looked with a sad gaze. He wanted to remain Fiona's faithful guard. The master gave the order, and the guy cannot go against it. The second tried to be indignant, but nothing goes against the order. Hearing Annette's warm words that he would do his job well and not lose his fiancée for the second time, he agreed. It was very pleasant. I calmed my friend. He was completely drunk and was already crying because he wanted to protect her. The heroine laughed, trying to calm both of them. She narrowed her eyes. Her friends were close, her soul was light. The men were leaving, they were drunk. Fiona glanced sideways at Johan and smiled at her thoughts. Suddenly, she was overcome with pain, burning her entire body. And the girl saw the third prince, who wore a crown and called her, smiling predatorily and dangerously. She didn't hear him calling her. She glanced sideways, trying to understand what kind of vision this was. The boy calmed down, brought the glass to his lips. He didn't believe that the Duchess was so important to the boys. If he had known, he would have said earlier. The heroine did not hear the boy. Her thoughts were occupied with the vision, trying to understand what it was. Because in front of her, she sees a boy wandering in the darkness. In the future, he will become a very dangerous emperor. The man's gaze in the vision was cunning, and he waited for her to come. She was curious why he did nothing. Knowing who she was, he could benefit, whether in negotiations or blackmail. The prince smiled and felt embarrassed, but did not turn his head. This is how he is. He lives at the behest of his heart. The heroine knew that the man had a heart. Willem did not have one. Fiona's memories were still with her. She remembered how she got it from the second prince, and then the third took care of the baby. The boy blamed himself for not being able to help his sister. The second prince was head and shoulders taller than him. Tears dripped from his eyes. He asked Fiona for forgiveness, buried himself in bed, taking the girl's hand, not worthy of being her brother. This was not the case. My sister never blamed her brother. She understood everything. Although she was young, she knew that his helping hand was extended. Johan is a good person. Only a kind person can know another's weakness and not pounce on it at the first opportunity. The girl's words surprised the boy. She took his hands between hers. The Duchess will go to the hospital. The young man can go with her. She looked straight ahead. Her green eyes penetrated inside. Such a person should become emperor. Johan recoiled. He shouted, "How will he get the crown? It's impossible." He opened his eyes in horror. The girl blushed, closed her eyes. There was no need to be categorical. She wanted to build a bridge between him and the magician. Ernst will definitely figure out how to eliminate the first prince. Many have already had such a desire. It's only a matter of time. She can only push him, but first you must think about who the people will choose. The girl can help, but you must decide for yourself. Fiona fell onto the bed. She felt a little dizzy. She drank too much alcohol and her head hurt. The maids who arrived smelled alcohol. The girl felt unwell. She asked for help to get ready and get some fresh air. She heard that it was better for her not to go out now. Those words surprised her, and she didn't understand why she couldn't. Fiona's determination was enviable as she rushed towards the exit with her servants and friends walking behind her. It all started in the room. The maids saw Colonel Belmore leaving the ladies' chambers. These girls spread throughout the mansion the rumor that they were having an affair. They saw the princess's eyes and definitely noticed love for this man in them. And the situation at night aggravated all the rumors. When they sat down to drink with Christian, the same maids spread even more rumors. I wondered why Sebastian did nothing about it, since the maids themselves are telling everything. There's nothing that can be done about it. A guess pierced her. She stopped dead in her tracks. Was this a test of loyalty? It confused her. Why did the man decide to carry it out only now? The Duchess understood that Ernst wanted to fight with the first prince. Swords would meet, day and night they would fight. And for this, Fiona looked out the window. It is necessary to strengthen her position as the owner of the mansion. Only the most loyal people, indifferent to rumors, will remain. Fiona crossed her arms over her chest. A butler and a maid stood before her, finding them out and talking to them. Serious? The girl clarified that they already know who is spreading these rumors about her and Christian. There were no more smiles. They apologized for the inconvenience, but they had to fix everything as quickly as possible before Ernst found out. They showed the two who were spreading rumors. For security reasons, they could not leave them in the mansion. For spreading false rumors and slander, they are imposed a severe punishment. They must pay dismissal letters, but not give letters of recommendation, condemned to 10 lashes. This was the lady's order. Such a punishment may seem too harsh, but it is the only way that will help them without ruining their lives. I looked at the report. Ernst can be ruthless with those who lose his favor. The servants admired the girl's intelligence. The girl asked Owen to leave them alone with the grandmother. They had a different conversation. She said decisively, she ordered the woman to tell her everything. Lately she has been too pale, so now she will tell everything that happened. A drop of sweat rolled down her cheek. She had to admit it sooner. She had trouble with her vision. The maid told her in a lifeless voice. They told her that due to her age, the illness was progressing rapidly. The girl screamed and put her hand to her mouth. Unable to bear it, the Duchess hugged the old woman. The man who taught her compassion felt great pity and pain. Even she had her part. She will retire, but only after the masquerade ball will they discuss her salary for the years of service. A decision was made. The grandmother smiled. She still needs to train a new maid. The Duchess looked out the window with a sad gaze, watching the falling leaves. Grandma Betty had come a long way. How tired she was. She looked out the window. Ernst was there. She screamed and put her hands on the glass. The man was mounted on a horse. He looked towards the mansion. He noticed a girl in the window. It was Gabriella, his beloved. He raised his hands to catch her. A smile lit up his face. These two people were once happy. Now, looking at him through the window, placing her hand, the heroine understood that it was very difficult for her without him. Her soul was crying. The next morning, Fiona sat at the table and wrote something on a piece of paper. Her concentration was betrayed by her tense back, while it was risky to hire a tutor for Charlotte. The girl brought the pen to her lips. It is also necessary to find teachers for each subject. She brought the letter closer to her eyes. Thanks to the princess's position, you can even hire famous artists. And she tried to decorate the letters wonderfully. Her whole body trembled. I stretched my muscles. I finished. Now I need to send the letters. The Duchess asked Hazel to tell the cooks to prepare desserts without milk. The maid was surprised by this. She smiled. You just have to go and tell them. They will understand everything. Something that the stomach digests easily. As she went downstairs with a pile of letters, her attention was drawn to the crowd of officers milling in the hallway. The girl was curious about what was happening in Ernst's office. All the officers were single. Her face darkened. The realization that her husband had decided to give her a choice between lovers was unpleasant. Ernst looked out the window, sending the most resilient and brave on an extremely important task. For this, only volunteers were needed. One of the young men raised his hand. He tried to do it. He let everyone else go and let James discuss the details. He turned to the officer. He ordered him to follow Christian to the palace and return. The task was given. The order was accepted. But before leaving, James said he saw the lady. She had a lot of letters in her hands. The letters were very beautiful. There were many. The young man suggested that they were love letters written to the Duke. The Lord was annoyed. He lowered his gaze. I didn't want to write to him. It was impossible. I really listened to the advice and was looking for a mistress. Despite everything, he reprimanded the sergeant for showing too much interest in his wife. He waved his hands and tried to justify himself. Fiona and Annette were preparing for the trip. Hazel handed them a basket of provisions and warned them not to forget anything. The third prince called Fiona, smiling and waving his hand. After all, he decided to join their trip. The man praised her appearance, very beautiful, and as she got into the carriage, she thanked him cautiously. Once in the carriage, the heroine looked at Johann and saw not just a child, but an emperor with a crown on his head. Looking at the passing scenery, Fiona was sure that if she attracted the magician to her side, then her brother would be the same as in the vision. The Polar Night Specialized Hospital was a closed room, located inside the forest. There was an elevator that the workers pulled from above and lifted people. The wooden body was quite heavy. The third prince saw this. His joy knew no bounds. He shouted. He wanted to know who the owner of such brilliant ideas was. The heroine smiled, embarrassed. She thanked the prince. All these were her ideas. They were useful. It's good that it caused such a reaction in people. They saw the doctor. She smiled, putting her hand to her chest, greeted Her Highness, and was glad to see him. Everyone was working on a cure for night sweats. They didn't look very good. The princess hoped that this time they would succeed. When they asked about the magician Urian, the girl hesitated. He was probably still sleeping. She sounded insecure. She shouted at the boys, who flinched at this shout, to wake up this lazy guy. But there was no need to wake anyone. The magician was walking, rubbing his eyes, and saw the lady and greeted her. A blush appeared on the girl's cheeks. She was fascinated by the man. She found him handsome, even after waking up. She approached him and handed him a basket. It was vegetarian cookies, baked especially for him. The young man was pleased when he took the basket. He touched the duchess's hand and lingered on it. She abruptly pulled her hand away and stepped back, but the smile was glued to her face. It was all the cook. He was cooking. The boy brought his face closer, but the princess ordered, whispering seductively like a tempting snake. The doctor's face darkened. Lowering her head, the heroine smiled. Although he seemed harmless externally, his habits were cunning, like a fox's. I decided to play with him, so I smiled sweetly and confirmed to him that, therefore, a man should take time alone. Once in the office, having a cup of tea, they talked about studying the drug. The girl wanted to know the results. She raised the sheets of paper into the air. These studies, no matter how much they are done, are useless. They will fail. Fiona became sad when she heard that it was not an illness, but a curse. Her face darkened, and she put the cup aside. According to the man, all natives of this land are susceptible to night sweats. The only difference is in the timing of its manifestation. You might be lucky, and it won't manifest. There was a question about the luminous herb, which inhibits the manifestation of the disease, but it has divine power. He exhaled to the side. Fiona also asked about unicorn tears, if they could help cure, and she eagerly awaited an answer. Unicorn tears, used by Ingrid to save Dante, can cure everything. The heroine remembered, in the original version, if you mix the right tear, which has absorbed sunlight, and the left, which has absorbed moonlight, you will get a legendary medicine. In the original version, few people knew about the unicorn's tear, but Dante persistently told everyone magicians about his beloved's feat. The girl read it and knew for sure. Magician Urian could not know about the tears, she thought. It was very possible that he would react to the question. The princess exclaimed upon hearing that terminally ill patients can be cured thanks to a unicorn's tear. Since the luminous herb blocks, this one can cure. The character calmed down, as expected. This is the best part of the original. She understood everything. But these tears are not so easy to extract, Urian continued. Without paying attention to the girl, they don't even know where unicorns live. The heroine was the person who read the original, so she knew where these animals lived. The luminous forest. Entering this forest was not so easy. I looked sadly at the tea in my hand. The meeting with the magician was good. I learned a lot about tears. All that remained now was to discover the existence of time magic to save the girl, and whether it could be applied to a patient in the last stage. The boy looked at her. Magic is not omnipotent. Something must be sacrificed. It was the answer to the question. Magicians of abilities cannot spend it on their personal items. It requires a huge fee and should only be used to help others who are suffering. There were also regressors who went back in time, but invisible people suffered from this. Many hundreds died. Fiona remembered herself. How, after all, did she also use it to move to another body? Does it apply to her? I asked the magician if it was because of those repatriates that people in the duchy suffered from night sweats. The man was surprised by the new theory, but agreed that it was very possible that the princess was scared, because even more people could have suffered because of her. He checked his data and announced that, according to estimates, night sweats had increased. They had even doubled, he said. The girl realized that it was thanks to her. Gabriella and Ingrid, in general, were very similar. She closed her eyes. She really hoped that her move would not hurt anyone else. She was upset. Like Ingrid, she was looking for a cure for night sweats to strengthen her position and save people. Thoughtfully, she took a sip of the already cooled tea. She would need to resort to Ingrid's help. She was kind and gentle. She should help. Jurian admitted that he was a professor at the academy 2 years ago, but had to leave. Not very pleasant memories of work. I remembered how his students insulted him on the sheets and wrote about him being a tyrant. The girl became interested in knowing why he hooked the man so much. He laughed and, of course, easily answered with tremors. She raised her head, listening breathlessly. Magic loves your highness, and asked several times again. But thanks to the cookies, the girls were bribed with these magnificent cookies to answer all questions. The man tried to explain time jumps using the example of red dots. He asked a question and turned away, waiting for an answer. You can guess a lot about what a lady might see in the future. This is called foresight. Having heard that she does not use magic, I was very surprised by this, because a huge glow emanates from her. Magic is in her. Could he introduce her to a man who loves to study magic with his brother Dante? The heroine exclaimed in surprise. She took a sip from the cup. She was happy. How good that everything worked out. This is a wonderful decision that she could not have foreseen. He also surprised her with this news, saying that she too was a person from her lands who knew magic. Johan listened and confirmed that the mother was a foreigner, perhaps from a family of mages. The third prince exclaimed that if he too was from this family, then he needed to be taught magic. He asked the boy. He clenched his fist. It will be a powerful weapon. The first magic emperor is likely to appear. Upon leaving, the girl realized that it was raining. She needed to return before it was too late and wondered what to do. She was in no hurry to get into the carriage. Before her eyes flashed the way the girl agonized. She was scared, very scared. The rhinestone was choking her. Fiona did not expect to faint upon seeing the carriage and the rain. The memories were with her. That's why she was afraid. Annette sympathized with the lady. Apparently, that near-death experience was deeply ingrained in her head. We looked out the window. The rain would not stop soon. Today it would be better to spend the night at the hospital. I thought about my husband, but I pushed those thoughts away because he didn't care and definitely wouldn't worry. And Ernst, at that moment in his office, heard Sebastian, who showed him the ladies' tourism proposals. The assistant was very surprised when he heard the man ask about his wife's birthday. He began to shout indignantly, "How is it possible that the husband doesn't know about his wife's birthday? It would be better to ask her personally." Sebastian saw the hand with which he hit the table. The man understood that he was angry and annoyed. His face darkened when he heard his friend say that women like Fiona no longer exist, and they must be cherished. He felt pain realizing that the girl could leave, even though he didn't embrace her. But it still hurt. Sebastian was hiding something. He smiled, adjusted his glasses, and looked at his friend with a surprised expression. Owen explained, coughing into his fist. He was embarrassed to talk about this, but he told the rumors circulating in the mansion. That's why he fired so many people. The Duke was happy. His wife quickly got rid of the rats. The assistant remembered that Fiona was very much like a wonderful woman who solved matters in the same way. The butler understood the man. Everyone loved Gabriella, but thanks to the princess, many new and good things had changed. I heard Owen's words. I realized what he was doing with his wife, how he was distancing himself from her, and I thought about it. As soon as Ernst thought about apologizing to his lover, a messenger arrived with the news that the girl was feeling unwell. She was scared by a storm and had fainted. This surprised him greatly. His voice interrupted, feeling curious why the lady was afraid of storms, and he decided to say something more. And Sebastian revealed that the princess knew Gabriella had swallowed the family heirloom. In this heavy downpour, the rider galloped on a horse. The weather did not stop him. He advanced, his cloak fluttered behind him, rushing towards whom he loved with all his heart. Once at the hospital, the man began to shout loudly and call for Fiona, deafening the silence with his strong voice. Upon seeing Annette, he headed towards him. He stopped and clarified to him that his wife had fainted. Where and how was she? Questions rained down on him one after another. Fiona was sleeping as the door opened. The lieutenant showed him what was happening to her. In her dreams, she spoke of her pain, that her leg hurt. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. Ernst looked at the sleeping woman and wondered why her leg hurt. In that fragile body was his Gabriella. So many times, he made her know that he had returned. He touched her hand, hoping dreams would not be overshadowed by nightmares. He was a fool for not noticing her attempts to reach him. Upon opening her eyes, the princess saw Ernst, who was hugging her just as tightly, and he called her softly. The man admitted that as soon as he heard what happened to her, he immediately rushed here. The young man tried to apologize for disturbing the girl, but she didn't want him to. He clenched his fist and brought it to his chest. He swore that this would not happen again. He apologized for all his words and actions and asked her to be a good husband again. She jumped on the bed. The girl pinched the boy's cheeks, repeating that it was just a dream. But he denied it. Fiona hugged the man, barely saying his name. He recognized her. It happened, and he recognized her as he had long awaited. Convinced that the princess was his Gabai, he closed his eyes and hugged her tightly. With a blush burning her cheeks, the heroine smiled happily. Even the rain had stopped. Soon a rainbow would appear, and she brought her hand to her lips. A few days after the confession, in the dining room, A man was trying to feed his wife. She was so thin and light that it was harder for her to eat. I looked at my husband and didn't understand how a person could rarely change in such a short time. But I was happy about it. Opening the door, Sebastian burst into the dining room. He shouted at everyone to mind their own business. He shouted angrily, destroying the couple's idol. The Duke suggested moving the ball forward, coinciding with Fiona's birthday. The girl asked to have a date with her there.